Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello and welcome back to Podcasts of the Caribbean. This is episode 46, which also happens to be the start of season 5 and the beginning of our journey into The Price of Freedom, an almost 600-page novel that details how Jack Sparrow becomes the man we see him as in the movies. This book is seriously so amazing, and I highly recommend reading the whole thing yourself, as it really is a fantastic read. But I will say, trying to get a physical copy of this book nowadays is really hard. It's been out of print for over a decade, so that means any copies that show up either on eBay or other sites are usually $100 or more. I don't have a physical copy of this book either. Hopefully I will one day, but the easiest way to read this book right now is to buy the ebook version for like $12 on Kindle or Apple Books or whatever, which is what I had to do. At least it has an electronic version, as the Young Jack Sparrow series that we just finished covering is not fortunate enough to have that. But anyway, if you are able to, please read the full book, as I will try to cover most of it in these episodes, but some things will probably end up being left out, so I do recommend reading it for the full experience. Now, for the format of these episodes, it will be pretty similar to how we covered the Young Jack Sparrow series, where we will go through the book and read selected passages. I noticed that some people were disappointed that I didn't read those books word for word on the podcast, which I understand, as there are only audiobooks for the first 6 books in that series, but if I did that, I would probably get into serious trouble. So that's why I've formatted these episodes the way that I have. Also, these episodes are meant to be more of an analysis too, as we are trying to go deep into the lore. So that's why I've done these episodes this way. But before we dive into some background on The Price of Freedom, let's cover some recent Pirates of the Caribbean news.
I hear a rumor.
You may have also heard whisperings and rumors.
A message from someone you know.
I always listened like a thief for news of the Black Pearl.
So we've actually got a pretty decent amount of news to go over here, and we'll start with things that are confirmed to be happening. First up, last week, Disney announced a new stage show that will be on one of the new Disney cruise ships that is launching later this year. The specific ship is the Disney Adventure, and this one sails out of Singapore. But the show is called Captain Jack Sparrow and the Siren Queen, which already has my attention. From the Disney Parks blog, it says, "Join Captain Jack Sparrow and his band of pirates as they battle with an ink-squirting giant squid and hunt for rare, dazzling treasure during Captain Jack Sparrow and the Siren Queen." This all-new show, coming to the Disney Imagination Garden stage, will have swashbucklers of all ages singing a hearty yo-ho as you're recruited for a thrilling journey with the sea's most charming yet roguish captain and his pirate crew. While this isn't much more than a short stage show that's probably tailored to kids, what is exciting about this is that it is the first real piece of Pirates content we've gotten since 2021, when the Sea of Thieves: A Pirate's Life crossover happened. So it is also directly putting Jack Sparrow in the spotlight again, which Disney hasn't done since that Sea of Thieves collab almost 4 years ago now. So it's very exciting nonetheless. The next piece of news is still unconfirmed, but it is becoming increasingly more true as leaks continue to release. But recent LEGO leaks have stated that there is a new LEGO Black Pearl set releasing in September of this year. The most recent leak said it is around 2,800 pieces and contains 7 minifigures, which are Jack, Will, Elizabeth, Gibbs, Anna Maria, Marty, and Cotton. While this is only a leak and is still unconfirmed by LEGO, there have been leaks for the last 2 months with increasing amounts of information about it. So don't get your hopes up just yet, but if this ends up being true, I would probably see LEGO announcing this sometime in the summer if it does end up releasing in September. And the last thing, there have also been more Pirates 6 rumors over the past few months, of course, which include either Pirates 6 filming later this year, a new rumor last week that said Johnny Depp is returning as Jack Sparrow. There was also that one last year that they are filming in St. Vincent, among other things. Please remember that we don't know how true any of these are, so take all these rumors with a grain of salt. Hopefully we get some actual confirmed news soon, but for now, these are all still unconfirmed rumors. But with all that news out of the way, let's get back to The Price of Freedom. Okay, before we jump into the actual book, let's get a little background on it. So the book was written by Anne C. Crispin, who goes by the pen name A.C. Crispin. You may know her work from other books she's written. She's written a lot of Star Trek books, along with Star Wars books. She wrote a trilogy of books about Han Solo from Star Wars, and apparently these were the books that got Disney interested in hiring her to write a book about Jack Sparrow's backstory. Now listen to this. According to Anne, Disney originally asked her to write a book about the voyage to Ile de Muerta and the resulting mutiny by Barbossa and his crew. Crispin actually had a full outline of this story done before Disney changed their minds and told her to go further back in the timeline. I would love to see that outline because that would be so cool to have as a book. But anyway, she began writing The Price of Freedom while At World's End was still in development. The book took 3 years to write, and Disney also provided Crispin with the first screenplay of At World's End, written by Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio. And this draft of the screenplay was potentially one that still had the people on cargo scene in the movie, and that might be why this book is essentially based off of that. Of course, the scene was cut from the final film, but the book was written with the screenplay in mind, so that would be the reason. And also, this whole people on cargo, Jack disliking slavery, this whole topic, you will find it in literally almost every piece of Pirates content that came out around 2007, 2008. It is referenced everywhere. It's referenced in the Young Jack Sparrow series. It's referenced in the Legends of the Brethren Court series. Like, it is everywhere. It's also in the At World's End junior novelization. It is everywhere. So they wanted this to be a confirmed fact. It's just they left it out of the film for some reason. So anyway, Disney told Crispin to stick to historical fact unless it contradicts established Pirates of the Caribbean continuity. Now you may ask, how did she keep everything accurate to the pre-established world? Well, apparently, Disney provided her with a 400 to 500 page volume called The Pirates Mythology, which contains everything about the Pirates universe and some extrapolations. She said it also contained things like the names of every minor character in the movie, along with a line or two about each character, locations, maps, ships, literally everything about the Pirates universe. Let me just stop for a second and ask, how can I get a copy of this? Like, I would devour everything in there. That would be incredible to read. I wonder, though, if Disney has this outline of the Pirates universe, how did crazy plot holes like the ones in Dead Men Tell No Tales make it into the movie? That's a question for another time. Anyway, Crispin was also given the first book in the Legends of the Brethren Court series, which had been released around the time The Price of Freedom was being written. This was the only book in the series that she read, and Disney said that she didn't need to maintain continuity with them. Now, there are some references to the Young Jack Sparrow series at the beginning of The Price of Freedom, and I will talk about them when we get to it, but if you're expecting any characters from that series to return in this book, well, you are out of luck. Apparently, there was also supposed to be a sex scene in this book, but Disney, of course, asked for that to be cut, although Crispin said it was more hot than explicit. But that should also be a bit of an indication about the age rating of this book. This is a very mature book. It deals with and talks about a lot of mature themes. There are some unsettling things that are discussed in this book. Major case in point is slavery and the treatment of African people during this time period. Some descriptions do go a little graphic, I will warn you here. And I will try to keep everything as PG as I can, but I just want to give a warning to you all here at the start. Throughout the book, I will try to give warnings before we cover a really intensive part, whether it be about slavery or a graphic depiction. So if you want to just skip ahead, you can do that. But anyway, The Price of Freedom was released on May 17th, 2011, 3 days before On Stranger Tides released. So it essentially became a tie-in book for OST. But unfortunately, only 2 years later, Crispin would pass away after a long battle with bladder cancer that ended up becoming terminal, which is really unfortunate as she is a phenomenal writer and did actually have an idea for another Pirates book, but Disney never contracted her to write it. While researching, I found out that A.C. Crispin also made accounts on the POTC Wiki and the Pirates of the Caribbean forum at the time, Keep of the Code, Apparently, she posted excerpts there and kept in touch with the fans as she was writing it. So it's really unfortunate that she passed away, as she seemed like a great person and an amazing writer. Cancer sucks, man. Okay, but with all that background out of the way, let's go ahead and dive right into the prologue of The Price of Freedom. So the prologue is titled Zerzura, the Lost City, and that is the last little background info I want to bring up to you all. The legend of Zerzura is a very important part of this book, and it actually is a real legend. But for this book, the secret island we will come to see in just a second is something that was made up by Crispin. But for a quick little background about Zerzura, it is a legendary oasis that was supposedly located in the Sahara Desert in Africa west of the Nile River in either Egypt or Libya. The earliest reports of Zerzura potentially existing go back to the 1400s, where it was described as a white city and called the Oasis of Little Birds. Every account of Zerzura differs since it is a mythical legend, but there have been plenty of interpretations throughout time about what it is and what actually lies in Zerzura. In this book, we will find out that there is indeed something at the heart of Zerzura that keeps it thriving. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. The most common legend about Zerzura dates back to 1481, where a camel driver came to Benghazi in super bad shape and recounted to their ruler that he had been to Zerzura. In the camel driver's story, apparently he and his caravan got caught in a vicious sandstorm that killed everyone but him. After the storm passed, he found himself lost as the sandstorm had changed his surroundings. It was then that a group of men found him and took him back to the city of Zerzura to nurse him back to health. The city itself is described as a very luxurious and beautiful city with fair-skinned people that somehow were living in the middle of the desert. But the stories are different depending on what you read, but this is the most common and probably the first account of Zerzura ever in history. Now, Zerzura has never actually been found, so it is still a legend, but we are going to go there right now in The Price of Freedom. So let's finally get into this prologue and see what is happening. So this prologue begins in Zerzura, like I said, and we meet the pharaoh, whose name is Taharka. He wakes up in the middle of the night, and we find out that he had just spoken to his god, who is Apedemak. There is a lot of Egyptian mythology in this book, which I do find really fascinating. But Apedemak, like described in the book, has the body of a man with the head of a lion. In this book, he is the high god of the people of Kerma, along with the island kingdom of Zerzura. And we find out as well here that Zerzura is cloaked from the outside world by a barrier of spells, which keeps the island cloaked in a magical fog that hides it from sight. Zerzura lies off the coast of Africa here in this book. But Taharka gets out of bed and dresses himself and makes his way out of his bedchamber to the room of his youngest son, Prince Aniba. His wife, Queen T, is also here looking over Aniba. We find out that Aniba is sick with a feverish, wasting illness that he picked up a month ago, and at this point both Taharka and T know that Aniba will die. We also find out that Taharka has already commissioned builders to construct a tomb for Aniba next to the ones already carved for himself, his wife, and his other two children, Shabako and Amenirtis. But anyway, Taharka kneels down beside his son, and they begin to speak. So let's dive into the book. As he heard his father's soft step, the child turned his head, and his lips curved upward in a weak smile. "Father," he whispered. Taharka bent down and kissed his son's cheek, feeling dry heat against his lips. The fever was not high, but it was relentless, and slowly it was burning away the young prince's life. It was not proper for a pharaoh to display despair, or for a father to show fear, so Taharka was careful not to reveal his reaction as he straightened, smiling down at his youngest. "My boy," he said softly, "did you eat all the soup your mother prepared with your own hands? You need your strength." Little Prince Aniba nodded solemnly. "Almost all," he assured his father, with a quick sideways glance at his mother, a look that begged her not to reveal that he lied. Queen T smiled lovingly at her son and nodded agreement. "He did very well, husband." The pharaoh nodded. Good," he said. "Soon you will be well, and we shall go together in my chariot to the royal preserve to see the lions. You shall ride with me, and you may help me drive the horses." For a second, the child's wan features brightened into a genuine smile, as a flash of the real Prince Aniba showed through the wasted flesh. "Oh yes, father," he said. "You will let me hold the reins? And we can see the lions." You have my word as Pharaoh that we will do it as soon as you are strong enough, my son, Taharka said, touching the sacred bracelet that he never removed, the broad golden wristlet that was incised with the stylized head of a lion, symbol of Apademak and the royal house of Kerma. The pale green gems that traced the lion's head had come from the heart of Zerzura, the sacred stone lying in the palm of the golden statue of Apademak that stood far below the earth in the heart of the ancient labyrinth. The chamber at the heart of the labyrinth contained the island's greatest material treasures, gold, gems, and sacred texts detailing the story of their people's journey from their ancient homeland of Kush millennia ago. But those worldly treasures paled in comparison to the heart of Zerzura itself. Without the magical powers of the heart, Kerma would be no more. The gem pulsed with the power imbued in it by the god himself. Prince Aniba's dark eyes shone in the faint light cast by the oil lamps as he saw his father take this sacred oath. "I cannot wait, father." "Then hurry and get well, my son," Taharka replied. "But to do that, you will need your rest. Can you close your eyes and sleep now?" The little boy nodded. His eyelids were growing heavy. Even the smallest exertion tired him. His parents and the nursemaid watched in silence as the little prince fell asleep. Taharka glanced at his queen. "We need to talk," he said softly. "Come." T rose slowly, stiff from sitting so long and half faint from exhaustion. Taharka caught her arm to steady her. The queen glanced worriedly at her son, clearly reluctant to leave him for even a moment, for who knew how many more moments she would have with him. "Menhotep would care for him," Taharka assured his wife. "She loves him as if he were her own." The nursemaid nodded agreement. "You need rest, royal lady. I shall keep watch, and will summon you at the slightest change in the prince's condition." T's shoulders suddenly sagged, and she gave in, allowing her husband to lead her from the sick chamber. The pharaoh put an arm around her slighter form, steadying her as he guided her through the living quarters of the royal palace, faintly lit by oil lamps tended by the slaves, but even more brightly illuminated by the moonlight through the floor-to-ceiling windows designed to capture the faintest of the ocean breezes in this hot climate. As they reached the end of the private wing of the palace, he turned her, and they stepped out onto a balcony overlooking Zerzura, the shining city. Below them lay the great harbor with the moonlight gleaming on the waves. They stood side by side, Taharka's arm still protectively around his wife's shoulders, gazing out at their domain. Finally, Queen T roused herself from her sad reverie and looked up at her husband. Tenderly he touched her cheek, his fingers brushing lightly over her tightly curled hair, cropped short into a dark areola to facilitate her wearing her royal wigs. Her eyes, enhanced with the traditional kohl, were large and the color of onyx as they searched his features intently. "Something is different about you, my king. What has happened?" Taharka nodded. His queen was as perceptive as she was wise. Looking down at her, seeing her lovely but strained features, he summoned his courage and resolve. "It is the only way that our son might be saved." "I dreamed tonight," he said slowly, "and in my dream Apademak spoke to me and told me what I must do." Queen T's eyes widened. "Tell me this dream, husband." Taharka closed his own eyes, the better to recall every detail. "I dreamed that I was driving my chariot along the beach. The waves rolled in and splashed my chariot wheels. My horses plunged along, their hooves flinging up sand and surf. I could taste the salt on my lips. Ra cast his golden rays down on the sky, and it seemed that the beach had no end. It was a moment of great joy." The pharaoh took a deep breath. Then suddenly, in the way of dreams, everything changed. Before me there was a great wall of stone, a cliff so sheer and high there was no climbing it. I fought to slow the horses, lest we crash into it. I brought them to a halt barely in time. As I turned them, thinking to go back, I saw there was another cliff behind me. I was hemmed in between the cliffs and the sea. There was nowhere to go. As I hesitated, trying to decide what to do, I heard Aniba calling me. "Father," he wailed, "help me." Queen T's eyes filled with tears, but she did not allow them to fall. Taharka saw her blink them back, and his heart tightened in his breast. "What then?" she asked. I heard a sound from the cliff to my right. When I turned my head, a great golden lion came bounding down the sheer face of the stone. It was much larger than any lion I had ever seen. His mane gleamed like the sun, making a nimbus of light around his face. He leaped down from the cliff and stood before me. The horses plunged in their traces with terror, but then the lion spoke and they fell quiet, and stood as still as the statues in the temples. "The lion spoke?" Her voice trembled. "Yes." His voice was the crashing of the surf in a storm, the rumble of thunder, and the sound the earth makes when it shakes. All those sounds together, It was when I heard the voice that I knew this was no ordinary lion, but Abidemak himself. His words echo still in my mind. Look to the sea, Taharka. You must cross the great ocean. Only by doing so you will find the means to save what you hold dearest. It is the only way. And when the lion finished speaking, his mane blazed up so brightly that I could no longer look, but had to shut my eyes and turn my face away. When I opened my eyes again, I awakened to find the moonlight on my face. But I knew I had just experienced a true dream, one such as the priests describe. I knew the god had told me what I must do. Cross the sea, murmured T. When she looked up at her husband, fear shadowed her features. Leave our island, husband? Leave your people who need your rule, your strong hand to guide them? Go out into the world? We have been protected from outsiders for so long. Who knows what evils may be found in the outside world these days? Cannot you send General Kashta and High Priest Senkamashian? They are strong, able men who are loyal to you. They would travel and search the doors of death and beyond for you. Pharaoh Taharka shook his head. You know I am the only one who can undertake this quest, my queen, he said. Surely you have not forgotten what I wear. In the moonlight, the wide wristlet gleamed, and the gemstones glittered. Deprived of their color, they flashed like the moonlight along the wave crests. I do not speak of it often, but recall that my bracelet is one of the three. Long ago, when the two kingdoms of Egypt and Cush had been one, the sons and daughters of Cush had turned their faces from the old life to travel west, toward the setting sun, leaving behind all they had known. They had acted because Abidemak had appeared to the son of their pharaoh and the chief priest to express his wishes that his chosen people should depart and found a new land to the west. To guide them on their journey, he had given them the heart, and acting on his orders, the priest had used tiny slivers from the heart to fashion the three bracelets. Each endowed the wearer with certain powers. The one Taharka wore gave its wearer the power of navigation, of locating whatever it was the wearer needed. The bracelet's magics would guide him anywhere in the world to achieve his quest. It also granted him insight, a great gift for a man who must rule wisely. The pharaoh's 13-year-old son and heir, Prince Shabako, wore the one that would allow him to unlock any lock, any portal. Its power extended to unlocking hearts, both human and animal. He had never met a stranger, it seemed. Taharka's daughter, 15-year-old Prince Amenirtis, wore the wristlet that allowed the wearer to see through illusion, to lift the magical mists that cloaked the island of Kerma, and to discern the portal to the sacred labyrinth. She could weave and unweave spells, and any thread she spun, any fabric she wove, was a joy to gaze upon. Her spell-weaving ability also gave her insight into the way words were woven together to produce language. It took the power of all three bracelets used together to open the way into the labyrinth and the treasures it contained. The queen raised a finger, but did not quite touch the magical wristlet. Anyone with a sight who saw that bracelet would know it for a thing of power, she cautioned. Greedy men would kill to possess it. And greedy women too, doubtless, observed Taharka dryly. Fear not, my queen. The wristlets have the power to conceal their true nature. Watch. He touched the bracelet lightly with their fingers of the left hand, closed his eyes, and summoned its power. Tingling warmth enclosed his wrist. Taharka heard his wife gasp. He opened his eyes to see that the wristlet had changed. Now only a slim strip of woven grass encased his wrist, a bracelet such as a child might make in an afternoon from amusement. In the middle of the band of grass, a small, flattened, hollowed-out pebble was threaded. The pebble was a common beach stone smothered by waves. Scratched into it were a few crude lines that, when studied from the correct angle, resembled the head of a lion. I did not know your bracelet could disguise itself, the queen said. They all can, the pharaoh replied. Magic is an intrinsic part of them, but when we are given our lessons in using their powers by the priests, we are cautioned against lightly revealing them. Taharka looked around as the palace, which stood on a rise, the first rank of the foothills, leading to a ridge of mountains that nearly bisected the island, then down at Zerzura, gleaming white in the moonlight. Of course, here in our own land there is no need to invoke the power of disguise the wristlets bear, but out in the world disguise will be necessary. T put a hand on her husband's arm, just above his bracelet. How long will it take you? She asked anxiously. I do not know how long, she trailed off, but Taharka knew what she was trying to say. Aniba had his good days or even weeks, but his strength had been declining steadily. The prince might last 2 or 3 months, perhaps. He would not last 6. I will be as swift as may be, Taharka assured her. It is early summer. The winds should be good. I will purchase passage on the fastest modern ship, or perhaps I shall purchase a new ship and crew. Once I am in the world, I will make the decisions necessary." He looked down at her. "Never doubt my love for you, or for our son. Rule our people well while I am gone, my queen. I think of you and Aniba and Amanirdis and Shabako every day. If my thoughts were birds, my queen, the skies above Zerzura would be dark with them." The queen managed a wan smile. "It is a brave thing you do, my husband. You were a good father." Taharka bent his head and kissed her, tasting salt on her lips. She responded with such fervor that it was as if he had just left and just returned, victorious. When he finally pulled back, it was only to murmur endearments and reassurances as she clung to him. When they stepped apart at long last, Queen T's shoulders straightened. "Fear not for our land, my husband. I will rule our people and guard our treasure until you return. This I swear." The pharaoh nodded. His heart was too full for words. Together the royal couple turned and walked back into the palace, their heads high, their strides measured and steady. Okay, so that is the end of the prologue, which shows us that Taharka is embarking out into the world to find a cure for his son Aniba. We also learn some more things about Zerzura, specifically the heart of Zerzura, which will become a very important part of this book. The heart of Zerzura is a large stone that sits at the center of the labyrinth underneath the city, and this stone is what powers Zerzura. It provides the illusion that shields the islands from outsiders and keeps the island going for years and years. And to protect it, 3 bracelets were made with a piece of the heart in them. These 3 bracelets have unique powers, and all of them are needed to open the way into the labyrinth. They can also disguise themselves, so keep that in mind. But to save his son, Taharka decides to venture out of Zerzura into the world, and that is where the prologue ends. The first chapter picks up with none other than Jack Sparrow himself. And we find Jack as the first mate on a ship named the Fairwind, which is a merchant vessel sailing for the East India Trading Company. We find out that the Fairwind is 3 days out from Jamaica, Port Royal to be specific, and Jack is standing on the quarterdeck near a cask of rum. And no, he is not drinking it. What he is doing is asking his assembled crew about the rum, or I should say, the lack of rum. And Jack says, "This rum," he said, raising his voice so he could be heard over the creaking of the sails, the slap of the sea and the rush of the wind, "is half gone." "Why is the rum gone?" And after he asks this, his crew continue to stand silently, most of them now looking down in embarrassment. And it's not because Jack doesn't like rum or anything, it's because this rum is cargo that they are meant to deliver, so now it is a problem. "I will tell you why the rum is gone," Jack roared. He thumped the top of the container. "This half-empty cask, which of last night was full of rum bound for England, rum entrusted to this vessel to be carried in her hold until we reach our destination, rum intended to be sold to the taverns and cellars of England to slake English thirsts, is gone because," he paused for effect, "several members of this crew that stands before me, this same crew of misbegotten scurvy sea dogs, crept down to the hold and drank it." He slapped his hand against the side of the cask where one of the staves had been pried out of alignment with the others, leaving a long dark stain of spilled rum down the side of it. Jack turned to the man standing beside him. Robbie Green was 5 years younger than Jack himself, which made him barely 20. He was a slender but whipcord strong youth with a ready smile and a mop of golden curls that he kept tied back with a black ribbon. Green, as second mate aboard the Fairwind, was responsible for the ship's cargo. "Mr. Green," Jack said, "what in your professional opinion is the precise word that should be applied to the action of starting this cask and subsequently drinking half of it, of wantonly guzzling our cargo?" Whoever had gotten to the rum had managed to bypass the locks on the entrances leading down to the holds. They started the cask, siphoned off the contents, drunk their fill, then retied the lashings binding the cargo, no doubt hoping the damage would be attributed to the rolling of the ship. Jack had barely relieved third mate Edward Tomlin when Robbie had appeared to show him the half-emptied cask. Devil take it, Jack had thought, eyeing the damage, and it had to happen on my watch. This was his and Robbie's first voyage aboard the Fairwind, and this incident was the first real challenge to Jack's authority as first mate of the vessel. When he first reported for duty, minutes before sunrise, Jack had been looking forward to an uneventful watch. They'd taken on fresh provisions with their cargo, and this morning the cook had served him fresh fruit with his porridge. Savoring the last bit of pineapple, Jack had ambled onto the weather deck, pleased to see that the good weather was holding. The brig was reaching across the wind, with all plain sail set. There was nothing better than the beauty of the early morning Caribbean on a vessel that was making good time. And then some of these misbegotten louts had to go and guzzle the EITC's rum, Jack thought, disgustedly, as he waited for the second mate's response. Green glanced at the crew, swallowed, but replied stoutly, "I'd call that stealing, Mr. Sparrow." "Aye, stealing," Jack repeated. "The very word I had in mind, Mr. Green. Drinking our cargo constitutes theft. Theft!" He turned back to the crew, who were mumbling and shuffling, scarcely daring to glance at one another. "And it is my unfortunate duty to discover the thief, or in this case, thieves." Robbie murmured, "It would take at least 3 men to move that cask silently, Jack. Nobody from the third watch reported hearing anything. I'll change the padlocks in the hatch leading down to the hold. We can't have this happening again." "Agreed," Jack said, dropping his voice so only Robbie could hear him. "Now to determine which of these wretched flea-infested lummoxes did the deed." So what Jack ends up doing is he makes his crew do a test to see if they are drunk or not. So he first gets a guy who he knows is sober, and he makes him walk along the gunwale. The guy does it successfully, and Jack obviously knows he would because he's sober. But then he gets one of the guys who he knows is drunk and tells him to walk the gunwale. He ties this guy to the ship just in case he falls, and of course this guy ends up falling off the ship. Thankfully he's tied on, but Jack ends up dunking him multiple times into the water to prove a point to the rest of the crew and to kind of wake this guy up a bit. After seeing that, the crew gets the idea, and the culprits end up confessing to Jack. And after this whole event happens, Jack hears someone yell down from the mast, the topman. He yells, "Sail ho!" So back into the book, everyone turned. Jack quickly strode forward, shading his eyes against the brilliant sun, squinting up at the topman. His heart quickened. He was back in the Caribbean, the Spanish Main. There were many pirates plying their trade in these waters. Even the infamous rogue pirates, who had been flying their red no-quarter flag for upward of 6 years now, tended to go after the rich pickings of the Caribbean. Jack glanced at Robbie, who was standing beside him, and saw that he was thinking the same thing. Both he and Green had history with the rogues, history they'd like to forget, but couldn't. Cupping his hands around his mouth, Jack shouted, "Where away?" The topman, a lad of no more than 16, pointed and shouted, in a strong North Country accent, 2 points forward of the starboard beam, almost in the wind's eye." Jack nodded, then turned and dashed up the ladder to the quarterdeck, heading for the binnacle. From the shelf behind it he grabbed his spyglass in its leather carrying case, then headed back down the ladder to the foremast, the mast closest to the bow. Robbie was already waiting for him, and reached out to take the spyglass case, but Jack shook his head. "I'm going aloft myself." In preparation for the climb, Jack took off his neat, sober tricorn hat, then his long, snuff-colored coat. Beneath it he wore a loose-sleeved shirt and a waistcoat. Leaning over, one hand bracing himself against the roll of the ship, Jack pulled off his brown shoes with the big silver buckles, then he stripped off his knee stockings. The deck planks were warm against the soles of his feet, still calloused from his days as an able seaman. He'd been a topman, working high in the rigging, making sail high above the deck. Jack bundled up his clothes and handed them to Robbie. "Watch my effects, please, Mr. Green." "Aye, Mr. Sparrow." Slinging the spyglass case on its leather strap over his shoulder, Jack walked over to the windward gunwale on the starboard side, hopped up on the railing, then started up the ladder-like ratlines. The wind pushed gently against his back, and the lines were harsh against his feet and hands. He climbed steadily, not looking down, ignoring the way the ratlines swayed with the roll of the ship, and gave slightly beneath his weight. He'd done this thousands of times before, in fair weather and foul. Furling sails in the teeth of a fierce squall was one of the most dangerous jobs aboard a ship. He paused halfway to his goal to breathe, after pulling himself over the side of the top, the small platform above the futtock shrouds. As he caught his breath, he looked out over the water. The color of the Caribbean Sea was unlike any body of water he'd ever sailed, and he'd sailed a lot of them. The Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Mediterranean, the Adriatic, the Aegean, and the Black Sea and the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, even the Coral Sea, lapping the shores of New Holland on the opposite side of the world. Jack had spent most of his life at sea, and he loved it. Automatically, he glanced at the eastern sky, smiling faintly to see the horizon clear of any threatening clouds. Squalls could come up with amazing speed. No matter what else they were doing, sailors kept an eye on the weather. So Jack gets up to Mr. Bates, who is up on the mast, and he looks out and he sees there is a ship out in front of them. This ship is a Blackwall frigate, as he sees. It is a full-rigged ship, probably 8 miles away. A frigate, not a cargo vessel like the heavily laden Fairwind. She was good sized, probably 400 to 500 tons burden, which made her twice as large as the Fairwind. Frigates were built for speed and war. This was probably a Royal Navy vessel. Black hull. That wasn't unusual, but her rigging, there was something familiar about her rig. Bloody hell, it can't be. He lowered the spyglass. His heart was pounding, not because of the climb up the rigging. He tried to reassure himself. I must be imagining it. He rubbed his eyes hard on the sleeve of his shirt, then raised the spyglass again. The stranger swam in his vision for a second. Then he could see her, more clearly than ever. Her white sails gleamed in the sun. Her masts were strongly raked to lend her speed. Her bowsprit was steeved almost level, giving her larger headsails. Jack sucked in his breath. A Blackwall frigate. Oh no. He looked again at the ship, trying to see if he had a red stripe just above her waterline, above and below her gun ports, and red gunwales. But she was still too far away to make out those details. She wasn't flying any flag, but that wasn't unusual. Fairwind wasn't flying her ensign either. Flags were expensive and wore out quickly when exposed to the elements. Ships usually hoisted their colors only when they expected to come alongside for a visit, to exchange news, or perhaps supplies. Or when they were in pursuit, because they're pirates. Pirate ships were usually much smaller than this vessel. He'd only ever known of one pirate who had acquired a frigate, but the more he saw her, the more certain he became. He'd seen this ship before, and she was no naval vessel. Jack Sparrow lowered his spyglass as memories rushed back to the day he first seen this particular ship. Alright, before we continue, let's quickly recap some things. So in that reading, we met Robbie Green, who is the second mate of the Fairwind, also about 20 years old, 5 years younger than Jack. So we can deduce here that Jack is around 25 in his mid-20s in this book. We also find out that rogue pirates have been sailing in the Caribbean for 6 years now, which will become important later, so keep that in mind. But what we're about to see here is the book will flash back to events from a few years earlier. Jack has just seen a familiar ship up ahead, a Blackwall frigate, like I said, that he recognizes, and after seeing this ship, it brings up memories from a few years back to when Jack was in Shipwreck Cove. We will see this happen multiple times throughout this book, where the current events will then flash back 2 years earlier. It makes like a dual narrative eventually that will all end up intersecting together. So anyway, we go back to Shipwreck Cove, and we also learn some new details about where Shipwreck Island is located. So according to this book, Shipwreck Island has a difficult and indiscernible location, which means it is almost impossible to pinpoint on a map. Some legends say that the island has no fixed location and moves, and people who knew where it was never gave up the coordinates, even if they were to be killed. One of the only correct maps showed its location about a day's sail off the northeast coast of South America, but unless the captain knew where to look, they would only see a gigantic island that looked like a mountain without a peak. We also find out that Shipwreck Island had been a volcano, but over time the volcano died, which left the interior hollowed out with a freshwater cove. The only way into the center of the island is through a narrow river that goes through the southern rock wall. This passage is what we know as the Devil's Throat. The outside entrance to this is beneath a rocky overhang that casts a shadow over the entrance, and this is what essentially cloaks the entrance, as it is hard to see unless you are looking for it. And this is also why Shipwreck Cove is impregnable, like we learn in At World's End. There is only one way in and one way out. For Shipwreck City specifically, we know it is built out of the hulls of hundreds of ships. No one knows how old the city is, but apparently legend has it that the foundation of the city is made of Greek triremes, Roman galleys, and dragon-prowed longships. I think that is really cool and adds so much interesting lore to Shipwreck Cove as a whole. There is a Spanish galleon about 3/4 up that was named Our Lady of Divine Inspiration, but pirates ended up calling it Our Lady of Divine Inebriation. And no one's surprised, this ship was converted into a tavern, now known as the Drunken Lady. And this is where we find Jack Sparrow, a little younger, with his French friend, Christophe Julien de Rapier, who is the captain of the ship La Vipère. Both of them are playing a dice game, and Jack is on a losing streak. Christophe wins the next game and buys another round of drinks for him and Jack, and he calls over the barkeep, who is a large Englishman named Steve. He is a recurring character in this book, so make sure to keep him in mind. He has an injured left leg and hip, and he makes his way over to Jack and Christophe's table with more rum. He gets angry at Christophe since he keeps calling him Etienne instead of Steve. But then we learn more about this Christophe guy. So we find out Christophe is the youngest man to ever captain a pirate ship that Jack has met. He is in his early 30s, so about 10 years older than Jack at this current moment. He's tall, handsome, has black hair and a mustache and beard. He is also always very well dressed in beautiful, expensive coats and clothes, which he purchases from his share of his spoils. We also find out that Kristoff is a skilled swordsman, and Jack has asked him for lessons. Even in just 2 months of learning from Kristoff, Jack's sword fighting skills have increased significantly. If you're wondering why I'm focusing a lot on Kristoff, it is because he will be a very important character throughout this book, so make sure to pay attention to him because he will come up often. Anyway, Kristoff drinks his tankard and calls on Steve for more rum, and he specifically asks for his wife to serve him. Now we get to meet Steve's wife Marie, who will also be a recurring character. Steve and Marie Seymour both run the Drunken Lady, and Marie has soft brown hair and is more modestly dressed in contrast to most other women in Shipwreck Cove. She delivers their drinks, and Kristoff, being ever generous, gives her a doubloon. Jack asks why he would give a whole doubloon to a barmaid, and Kristoff tells him it pleased him to share his treasure. This, of course, is an opening for Kristoff to gloat about his recent ventures, so Jack takes the bait and asks him. The captain laughed and waggled a finger at Jack. "Do you think I will give away all my secrets? I came upon this little hoard of Spanish gold last month. They were old coins, probably came from some mission along the coast where some padre concealed them against attack and died before he could reveal their whereabouts. Not a large chest, no. He made a small shape with his hands, but it was worth our trouble to acquire it, mon ami. You got it from a Spanish vessel?" "Oui, along with a respectable take of silver ingots and some very fine tobacco." Kristoff smiled. "They put up a good fight, those Spaniards. One must respect them for it." Jack nodded. He didn't much care for fighting. It was much safer, not to mention more challenging, to gain a prize by outwitting an opponent. The idea of treasure hunting had always appealed to him, and he had some experience at it in his younger days. "For a moment there, I thought you'd stumbled into the lost treasure of the Incas," he joked. "You know, the one that Pizarro, in his arrogance, lost." Kristoff didn't have Jack's knowledge of history. "Pizarro? Those Spaniards, always losing their treasure," he said with an impatient wave. "What I'd like to lay my hands on would be the treasure of Cortez." Jack managed not to roll his eyes. "You and every other buccaneer for the last 150 years, he said. "Nobody knows what happened to it. Even Captain Ward didn't record any legends concerning it." "Who is this Captain Ward?" Kristoff asked. "And what treasures did he record?" "I'm surprised no one has translated the book," Jack said. "It was published in England about 15 years ago. Sold very well, I gather. My Life Among the Pirates, by Captain J. Ward. Teague gave me his copy to read when I was just a lad. In one of the chapters, Captain Ward regales the reader with tales of treasure from all the pirates he encountered. Some of the legends go way back, hundreds, even thousands or more of years." "Sacre Dieu! I must find a copy of this book," said Kristoff. "Which is your favorite legend, mon ami?" "Oh, I don't know," Jack mused for a moment, then brightened. "There's this one about the island that sank beneath the waves because the streets were paved with gold. Or wait, am I mixing them up?" He ruminated for a moment. "Actually, it's rather a nuisance when everything turns into all one thing. One time in New Orleans, Jack stopped himself just in time. It didn't pay to babble about magical adventures. Kristoff blinked at him owlishly. "I heard about that one," he said. "They said it sank beneath the waves because it was cursed." Jack rolled his eyes. "Of course it did. There's always a bloody curse, isn't there? Why do so many treasures have bloody curses associated with them anyway?" He swirled the last of his rum in his cup and then drank, feeling the sweet fire course down his gullet. Kristoff grimaced. "Surely there are some without curses, mon ami." "Oh, sure," Jack agreed. "Let's see. There's a big haul of Viking gold they say is buried up on the coast of some land of ice." He shivered. "Don't much like cold, me. I'd rather stay down here in the Caribbean. And there are tales of treasure on magical islands in England and Ireland. Glastonbury, Camelot, Avalon, that sort of thing. But England is a long sail away, Jax. By the time we reached it, the leaves would have fallen and the weather would be miserable," Kristoff pointed out. "Rain, rain, nothing but cold, wet rain. Something closer to hand would suit us. Ah, I have it. They say Henry Morgan robbed a Spanish monastery of a gold cross and chalice." Kristoff traced a pattern and spilled rum on the tabletop. "The monastery was located somewhere on the coast of Panama. We could go after that, Jax." Jack waved his empty cup. Marie hurried forward to fill it again. "I don't know, mate. Robbing churches, that'd be tempting fate. Might as well mess with a curse, eh? No, I'd rather stick to digging up buried treasure or finding some ancient tomb or something. They say the pharaohs were all buried with heaps of gold and gems. Picture us finding some old pharaoh's resting place." "La Vipère has too much draft to make it up the Nile, Jax," Kristoff pointed out. smiling and winking at Marie as she refilled his cup. He had perfect teeth, Jack noted sourly. Jack was a good dozen years younger, and already had a gold tooth. Life just wasn't fair. Besides, didn't those Egyptian priests have magical powers? You want to talk about curses, mon ami? Kristoff trailed off and took a long swig. Oh, right, Jack said. That's true. No Egyptian tombs, then. He thought for a moment. They say the Templars hid tons of treasure. They said it would take a fleet of ships to haul it all away, and they say they had several caches of it. There are hidden treasure maps and ciphers and such. Jack sat back, ruminating. They set traps to deter thieves. Some of those traps were mechanical, but others... He ran his tongue along the edge of his cup to catch the last drop of rum. Other traps were unnatural. Magical guardians, undying sorcerers like that, he sighed. I bloody well hate those magical undying sorcerers, mate. They can take all the fun out of a treasure quest. Kristoff threw back his handsome head and laughed uproariously. Listen to us. We must be drunker than usual, mon ami. Talking seriously of magic. Next thing you know, we'll be discussing making love to sirens and mermaids. Jack managed to laugh, but it wasn't a hearty one. He'd been exposed to magic, and mermaids, sirens, ghosts, sorcerers, and sea monsters too many times as a lad to scoff at them now. I ought to introduce you to Tia Dalma, he found himself thinking. She'd set you straight, mate, and right quickly, too. But he said nothing. Tia Dalma was not someone you spoke of lightly. Jack could feel the slight bump within the waistband of his breeches where he always stored the compass she'd given him. But that, too, was something he never spoke of, or much less revealed. In its own way, it, too, was a treasure. So then Jack begins to talk to Kristoff about Zerzura, and Kristoff gets very interested in this whole legend, especially about the heart of Zerzura and all the treasure that lays at the end of the labyrinth. So they all talk about this legend of Zerzura and how they want to go and find the lost city and the treasure within. But Jack gets annoyed because he realizes that Teague is not going to let him leave. So back in the book, it says, Captain Teague had mentioned a few days ago that he expected Jack to set sail with him, and that they'd be leaving in a week. Teague wanted to sail north to investigate the rumors of rogue pirates wreaking havoc on merchant ships of all countries, both in the Atlantic and the Pacific. At first, when Teague, as Keeper of the Code, had first heard the royal navies of several countries were beginning to escort merchant convoys to protect them against ruthless rogue pirates, he'd been inclined to dismiss the rumors. But as time went by, the rumors continued and grew more numerous. It had been a full 6 months since Shipwreck Cove had first heard tales about rogue pirates, callously slaughtering both crew and passengers without provocation. Only a scant handful of survivors had managed to escape death by playing dead. The rogues were reported to fly the black skull and crossbones, plus a red flag that sported a demon's horned head. Traditionally, a red flag flown by naval vessels promised a fight to finish in wartime. But for pirates, the tradition was different. Flying a red flag signaled no quarter to any ship's crew that resisted, but guaranteed the safety of all aboard if the ship surrendered without a fight. These rogues did not follow that tradition. What they wrought was wholesale butchery, wanton murder, even towards ships that surrendered without firing a shot. This behavior was in direct violation of the code. It was Teague's responsibility as Keeper of the Code to investigate, and he expected Jack to accompany him. So a little while after, they keep talking about Zerzura, and they notice that there is a ship coming in to Shipwreck Cove. So Jack and Kristoff decide to go down to the dock and see who was on this ship and, who was arriving in Shipwreck Cove. So back in the book, it says, squinting in the sun after the gloom of the passageways, he saw the frigate's name painted on her bow, Venganza. As Jack and Kristoff started along the quay, heading for the dock where Venganza was now berthed, an imposing figure in a foppish coat and beplumed hat stepped out from a knot of onlookers ahead of them and started up the dock toward the ship. Jack hesitated, then stumbled, nearly falling. Kristoff grabbed his elbow. Too much rum, mon ami? Jack flushed and was glad for the shadow of his hat and his deep tan. I'm fine, he said, curtly, shaking off his friend's grasp. But his strides shortened. He didn't want to meet up with Teague. Somehow, Edward Teague, pirate lord and keeper of the code, had a knack for making Jack feel young and foolish. He wasn't sure just how Teague managed it, but he'd experienced it many times. His eyes narrowed and he squared his shoulders. Damn it, I'm not going to let him control where I go or what I do. Jack's strides lengthened until he had almost caught up with Kristoff. Ahead of them, a gangplank had been slid into place, so Venganza's crew could move easily between ship and dock. Ahead of them, Captain Teague stopped and raised his voice to be heard over the everyday bustle of the docking area. Ahoy, Venganza! Jack heard another voice, fainter, coming from the frigate. Ahoy, Captain Teague! The pirate lord of the Caribbean presents his compliments. Jack frowned, searching his memory. That was Don Raphael. Yes, he'd seen him years ago when he was about 9, and remembered a burly, weathered Spaniard with iron gray hair. The pirate lord had been accompanied by his granddaughter, Esmeralda, a short, chubby brat 6 years older than Jack. One time, Jack had teasingly yanked her thick black braid, and she'd pounced on him and given him a thrashing that had left him bruised for days. So, once Venganza's pulling up here, Jack gets interrupted by this old, drunken fool, who says that Jack owes him some money. This guy's name is Baldy. So, Baldy will not give up, and Jack has no choice but to knock Baldy out. And when he knocks Baldy out, Baldy throws up all over Jack's boots, which gets Jack very annoyed. But after this, he notices someone else is coming off of Venganza. So let's go back to the book and see who this is. When he looked back up after finishing, it was to see Kristoff at the end of the dock, doffing his hat with a gallant sweep and bowing with a grace worthy of the court of King Louis. Jack recognized Don Raphael as he stepped down from the gangplank, and then turned and offered his hand to... Jack blinked. She was standing there, staring straight at him as if obvious from her expression that she had seen the entire incident. Esmeralda? Jack thought blankly. But it can't be. She's beautiful. The young woman who stood there gazing at Jack with an amused expression was dressed in the height of fashion. Her gown and hat were of rose-colored satin trimmed with ivory lace, and the color set off her olive skin and black hair perfectly. She hadn't grown any taller. She was still petite, but her figure could no longer be termed chubby. Her gown, though modestly cut, revealed curves that made Jack determined to go over and greet her. He watched as Don Raphael assisted his granddaughter down the gangplank. As Esmeralda stepped out onto the dock, she turned her attention to Kristoff, who bowed over her hand, then kissed it. Esmeralda smiled at the Frenchman. Jack scowled. With all his being, he wanted to go over there, to bow over her hand in every bit as gracefully as Kristoff had, but he reeked of used rum, and despite his best efforts, there were still streaks of puke on his boots. Jack turned with a jerk and strode away, back down to the dock. As he passed the unconscious Baldy Malone, he aimed a furious kick at the old pirate's bare pate, but his foot didn't quite connect. So at the beginning of that reading, we do have a quick little mention of the Young Jack Sparrow series, saying that Jack had a bit of treasure hunting experience from back when he was younger. Also, the mention of the treasure of Cortez, which Kristoff would love to find, is none other than the cursed gold that we see in The Curse of the Black Pearl. Jack also mentions a book called My Life Among the Pirates by someone named Captain Ward, which is a fictional book that is probably inspired by the real book, A General History of the Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson. We also get another quick reference to the Young Jack Sparrow series, where Jack mixes up the legends of Atlantis and mentions the streets being paved with gold. He starts to tell the story, but stops after saying, "One time in New Orleans," which of course references the whole Sun and Stars amulet debacle, where all of New Orleans turned to bronze and then silver in book 5, 6, and 7 of that series. We also see that Jack still has his one gold tooth, which is another little callback to the Young Jack Sparrow series. And we also get mentions of Zerzura and the legend, and before Jack and Kristoff see a ship named Venganza coming into the cove. We also learn of the pirate lord of the Caribbean currently, who is Don Raphael, and his granddaughter, Esmeralda. But let's continue. Jack is yanked out of his memories and back into the present aboard the Fairwind. Jack heads down from the mast to change course, and he calls all hands on deck and has them make a new course west-northwest to evade the ship. He asks the cabin boy to wake the captain, who is named Nathaniel Bainbridge, so he can inform him of the new course. As the Fairwind changes course, Jack looks through his spyglass and sees the frigate is also changing its course to head straight for the Fairwind. Jack gives his spyglass to Robbie, and he also recognizes the ship. Jack then speaks the name and says that it is none other than the Venganza that is after them. After this, Captain Nathaniel Bainbridge appears on deck and asks why they are changing course. Captain Bainbridge is an older man who likes to drink and doesn't make it out of his cabin before noon. Jack informs him it is because they are being chased by a ship. He doesn't say that it is a pirate ship, he only tells Bainbridge that these waters are full of pirates, and it is wise for them to take caution. We also see here that Jack is talking a bit more professionally than he usually does, to make a good impression on high-ranking English officials and captains like Bainbridge. Jack deduces that Venganza will probably catch up to them in about an hour and a half, assuming she doesn't raise her royals or gallants. But unfortunately, she does, and Jack reduces his estimate down to 70 minutes. Bainbridge is still curious as to the new course, however. So Jack tries to assure Bainbridge that this is a pirate ship that is chasing them. And Bainbridge doesn't believe him because he sees it is a Blackwall frigate, which is obviously supposed to be a Royal Navy ship. So he does not believe for an instant that Jack is right about this being a pirate ship. Jack ends up making up this lie where he tells this whole story that he heard this tale that there was this crew who found this ship. The crew died from a sickness, and this crew, of course, was a crew of pirates who took hold of this ship, and that is the ship that's coming after them. But Bainbridge still does not believe anything that Jack is saying, and he assures him that this is none other than a Royal Navy vessel. It is not a pirate ship. So Bainbridge tells Jack to run up their colors because he believes that it is a ship that either has news from England or just wants to parlay with them. It's not a pirate ship, as he continues to think. But Jack knows the truth, and he knows that this is a pirate ship. He knows it is Venganza, and he knows it is captained by the pirate lord of the Caribbean, who is not Don Raphael. The pirate lord of the Caribbean now is Esmeralda. Yes, Esmeralda is now the current pirate lord of the Caribbean, and as to how that happened, we will find out soon. But we are flashing back again to where we were before, back in Shipwreck Cove, as Venganza is arriving and Jack essentially meets Esmeralda, although they had met as children. So he concocts a scheme here, and he is able to find out Esmeralda's full name, which is Esmeralda Maria Consuela Ana de Sevilla. But before he goes back to the dock to introduce himself, he heads back to Teague's ship, the Troubadour, which is where his berth and sea chest are. He cleans himself up and puts on his best shirt, and also shaves the stubble from his face, leaving only a mustache. Jack realizes it is now later in the day and remembers that Teague was holding an informal gathering of the pirate lords that are currently in Shipwreck Cove after Venganza's arrival. So he makes his way to the meeting room, which of course is the same room we see in At World's End, and Teague's guards recognize him and let him inside, and he sees Esmeralda in there with her grandfather Don Raphael. Teague is there, and we also see Mistress Ching is there, along with Eduardo Villanueva, which is cool. Ching, of course, Lord of the Pacific, and Villanueva is the Lord of the Adriatic. There is also another pirate lord here, and that is the Lord of the Caspian Sea. And that is... No, it's not who you might think. It is actually someone currently named Boris Palinchnik, a Russian pirate who is more commonly recalled Borya by his peers. Borya is a small, scrawny guy who wears a pair of spectacles on a ribbon around his neck. His name apparently translates to Little Butcher in Russian, and he doesn't really seem like a formidable pirate lord at first glance. He's got wispy gray hair, a thin and patchy beard, and his nose is always peeling from sunburn. We also learn that Borya's ship is named Koldonia, which is a powerful sloop, and apparently Borya has told Jack that the name means witch in Russian, and that he has apparently named all of his ships through the years Koldonia. But Jack, of course, has entered the chamber, so let's see what happens. As Jack entered the meeting room, every face in the room turned to him, eyes wary. Hands felt for their weapons, but then, as they recognized him, the pirate lords relaxed, except for the keeper of the code. Edward Teague's expression darkened. Then he made a discreet brushing away gesture with 2 fingers. The meaning was clear. Go away. Jack pretended not to notice it. Good afternoon, lovely ladies, he said, doffing his hat and making his most elegant bow, and esteemed gentlemen. A small ripple of amusement ran around the gathering. Pirates love to be mistaken for gentry, no matter what their country of origin. It was one reason they tended to dress expensively, if somewhat flamboyantly, when they went out in public in a safe place, such as Tortuga, certain strongholds on the Madagascar coast, and, of course, Shipwreck Cove. My apologies for my tardiness, Jack continued smoothly. I needed to assume more suitable attire. Don Raphael chuckled good-humoredly. Mistress Ching smiled. Villanueva laughed and saluted Jack with his wine goblet, and Borya's teeth flashed in the dimness. Esmeralda gave him a brief, unreadable glance. Teague's scarred, lined features never moved, but his eyes were hard and his voice harsh. "If you must come in, Jackie boy, sit down and stop babbling." Ignoring him, Jack sashayed into the room, halted beside Esmeralda's chair, then greeted Mistress Ching, Borya, and Villanueva individually. Taking a breath, he inclined his head toward the head of the table, still without making eye contact. "And our esteemed keeper of the code, Captain Teague, of course," he added. Villanueva, who was evidently on his second or third goblet of wine, suddenly straightened up. "Jack," he said in his heavily accented English, "that reminds me, you owe—" Jack smiled and bowed again. "I am leagues ahead of you, my dear captain," he said loftily, removing a small purse from inside his belt. He shook it, and it clinked. Handing it to the pirate lord with a flourish, he added, "And thank you so much, senor. I included a bit extra to recompense you for your patience." Villanueva muttered his own thanks, then quickly counted the coins before stowing this little purse away. Jack didn't wait for the pirate to finish counting, but instead bowed slightly to Don Raphael and his grandfather. "Mistress Ching, I see we have another gentleman and a young lady present. May I prevail upon you to provide an introduction?" The blind old Chinese woman laughed softly. She'd always found Jack amusing. "Don Raphael, Dona Esmeralda, allow me to present to you Jack Sparrow, Captain Teague's—" Her momentary pause was hardly discernible. "Protégé." Jack bowed again, more deeply this time, to Don Raphael, then more deeply still to Lady Esmeralda. "Captain," he murmured. "Lady Esmeralda." They returned his greetings. Jack was disappointed that Esmeralda didn't extend her hand. Nevertheless, he was now where he aimed to be, so he pulled out the chair next to her and sat down. Teague sat up straighter. "Let's return to what we were discussing before the interruption," he said, his voice flat. "I've concluded that we must take action regarding these rogue pirates. If these blackguards continue to plunder and menace merchant shipping, it won't be long before England, France, Spain, and probably Portugal will dispatch their navies to hunt down all pirate ships they find. They won't distinguish between those of us that keep to the code and these rogue pirates, these code breakers." Borya Palinchnik made a brief, slashing gesture. "4 months ago, off coast of English colony named Virginia, we saw smoke of burning. We sailed to investigate. Nothing left but burning ship and wreckage in water. Only living thing was cabin boy clutching oar, floating on water. Child told us she escaped death only by burying under bodies of slain. Pah! These cowards, they're not pirates, but butchers." Mistress Ching, who commanded a formidable fleet of her own, larger than even the Chinese emperor's fleet, shook her head, her blind white eyes gleaming eerily in the lantern light. "We have not seen any sign of them in the waters near the Chinese coasts," she said. "They have been preying off the coast of Spain," Villanueva said, "and they operate as Borya has described. We have found 2 burning wrecks, and other ships have simply vanished like this." Holding up his scarred right hand, he snapped his fingers. Just then, one of Teague's retainers entered, a cashiered old pirate who bobbed his grizzled head respectively at the gathering, then murmured softly to the keeper of the code. Teague nodded to him. "Ladies, gentlemen, let us continue our discussion over dinner." The guards opened the doors, and 4 crewmen, too old for ship service, began carrying in trays of food and more goblets of wine. They bustled back and forth as the conversation among the assembled pirate lords turned to more general, less confidential subjects. Jack covertly glanced at Esmeralda, trying to catch her eye, but she was determinedly not looking at him. Realizing that she was even aware of him cheered him greatly. Reynaldo, a former helmsman with a pronounced limp, placed a plate before him. Jack murmured his thanks, then sat poised as he slid Lady Esmeralda's plate before her. As he had anticipated, she glanced up at Reynaldo to thank him. As her eyes met his, Jack flashed her a quick smile, and had the satisfaction of seeing her hastily look back down at her food. Unless he was mistaken in the dim light, she was blushing. Scarcely noticing what was on his plate, Jack began eating, wondering how to get a conversation between them started. Should he wait for her to speak? Perhaps that would be best. By now, the pirate lords were busily discussing recent events and absent friends, exchanging information and gossip. Jack heard Don Raphael say, "You'll never guess who I encountered in Oporto a few months ago." "Who is that?" Teague asked, pouring more wine for his fellow pirate lords. "James." Teague's eyebrows rose, and Villanueva exclaimed, "Dios mío! I thought he must have met with a rope long ago. It has been years." "It has been many years," agreed Don Raphael. "I thought the same thing. But there he was, sitting at a table in a little taberna, eating. He took a bite of his own food, chewed, and then added, 'He's lost a hand.' You spoke with him, da? Borya asked. Of course. I walked over and joined him. He seemed startled but glad to see me. When I asked him later on how he was managing without the hand, he said that it wasn't so bad. The hook was as good as a dagger in a fight. So where has he been keeping himself? Villanueva asked. I asked him, but he wouldn't say. Prison? That doesn't seem likely all those years. Don Rafael shrugged. And it's not as though they lock us up. Jack swallowed hard. Everyone knew the penalty for piracy. He'd seen the gibbets too many times with their dangling bodies. Aside from the lost hand, how did he seem? Teague asked. Don Rafael shook his head, his expression puzzled. It was strange, Eduardo. He commented on this. The pirate lord ran a hand over his thick gray hair, which touched his shoulders. Since the last time we were together, I barely had any gray, but he didn't look a day older. Not a day. Jack's attention was suddenly far more focused. Interesting. I wouldn't mind not aging. Odd, Teague admitted. Few pirates lived to be old, and the few that did had features that betrayed their years. Did he brag as much as he used to? Mistress Ching asked. No, and that was strange too, Don Rafael replied. Did he brag as much as he used to? Mistress Ching asked. No, and that was strange too, Don Rafael replied. James was a lot more subdued. You remember his temper. He'd fly into such rages. Villanueva gulped wine, then nodded. I kept expecting his crew to slit his throat in his sleep and send him to Davy Jones, but they were all too frightened of him. The night I saw him, he held his temper, and his tongue, Don Rafael said. Very closed-mouthed, he was. I only saw his composure disturbed once during the meal. The taberna keeper's little lad came round to collect our plates, and when he turned and saw him, for just a second he looked scared. No, worse than that. Terrified. Don Rafael held out his wine goblet to be refilled. Can you imagine that? Afraid of a young boy. Silence fell as the pirate lords contemplated Don Rafael's strange account. Jack stole another glance at Esmeralda as she carefully patted her lips with her serviette. Reminded by her example, he used his own, not his sleeve. Okay, real quick, I'm going to pause to talk about this. So maybe some of you picked up on who Don Rafael is talking about here. His name is James. He lost a hand and now has a hook. He hasn't aged, and he is afraid of children. If any of that sounds familiar, that's because this is none other than Captain Hook from Peter Pan. I think this is a really cool and fun little Easter egg, and if you want to headcanon Pirates of the Caribbean and Peter Pan sharing the same universe, you can. I won't stop you. But technically, Neverland does indeed exist in the Pirates universe, along with Captain James Hook, if you want to assume that. But of course, this is all up to your imagination. But I think it's very cool to add Captain Hook into the world and tie both together. This is nothing more than a little Easter egg, but if it is a really cool little connection nonetheless. And if you want to headcanon that they're connected, you can. But I just wanted to bring that up here. Anyway, let's get back into the book. So as Don Rafael continues talking, Esmeralda actually asks Jack a question. So Jack immediately has his opening. Excuse me, Senor Sparrow, said a soft voice in cultured accents. Would you please pass the bread? Jack quickly turned his attention back to Esmeralda, pleased that she'd spoken to him. Quickly, he passed a loaf to her. Thank you, senor, she said, cutting away busily. You are most welcome. Now that he had an opening, Jack was quick to follow the advantage. How long have you been sailing with Don Rafael, Doña Esmeralda? He was rewarded with a little smile, and his heart jumped. Since I was 15, 11 years now. All the pirate lords speak well of him, Jack said. He's held in great respect. Hearing this praise of her grandfather brought another smile. Lady Esmeralda buttered her bread. He is my hero. We are the only family left to each other. After my parents died, he decided I must become a fine lady, perhaps serve at court, so he put me in a convent school in Barcelona. I missed him and the sea so much. Her smile took on a touch of irony. I hadn't been there a month before I knew I wasn't destined for the court of His Majesty. I've never been to school, Jack said. I can barely imagine what it would be like. What did you do? I applied myself to my lessons and went without sweets so that I could pay for fencing lessons in secret. After I had learned all they thought proper for a woman to know, I ran away from the school and found him. I was 15. He didn't try to take you back to Barcelona? She laughed softly. Not directly. Instead, he brought me to Shipwreck Cove. I think he thought I'd be so horrified by the exposure to pirate life that I agreed to go back to the nuns. Instead, I loved the life. I've been with him ever since. Jack calculated, then was glad the room wasn't better lit, because he could feel the heat in his face. So, that time when you had just come here from a convent? Esmeralda, taking in his expression, giggled. Would it have hurt worse to know you'd been trounced by a girl from a convent? Jack's sense of the ridiculous saved him, and he flashed her a grin. Yes, I suppose it would have. The bruises hurt badly enough. Teague wanted to know which of his men had thrashed me. What did you tell him? I was in a bit of a quandary, Jack admitted. I couldn't tell him the truth, of course, and I didn't want to identify anyone because Teague can be rough on those who annoy him. I've heard, she said softly. So what did you do? I didn't say anything, Jack said. Esmeralda shook her head. Her thick black hair, softly curling, was held back from her face by tortoise-shell combs. Jack found himself imagining what it'd be like to run his hands through the hair. Hastily, he looked down and took a random bite of food. What did Teague do to you for not telling him? She whispered after a moment. Jack picked up his wine goblet and took a sip. He gave me a worse hiding than you did, he said after a moment, careful to keep his tone light. Dios mío, she said softly. I'm sorry, she hesitated, and he could tell she was wondering how to address him. Jack, please. Very well. I am sorry, Jack. Don't be, he said. I'm sure I deserved it. Taught me a valuable lesson. And that was? Her English was very fluent, just with a delightful hint of an accent. First impressions can be very deceiving, Jack replied. I'll never again underestimate an opponent. Or a lady. He tipped his goblet toward her in a small salute, then drank. Her eyes widened, then narrowed slightly, and she in turn reached for her goblet. After she sipped her wine, she looked back up at him, and her dark eyes danced with mischief. That's a valuable lesson, she agreed, mock solemn. You've certainly learned a lot of things since the last time we met. Who taught you to be so charming? Jack looked at her and smiled, a slow, genuine smile. Do you like to fish, Doña Esmeralda? Sometimes, she said, then added slowly, I like swimming better. Are there still good places to swim on the other side of the island? There are, Jack said. Would you like to sail around the island and find some of those places? With me? That would please me, Jack, she said. And please, call me Esmeralda. Nothing would please me more, Esmeralda. Jack smiled at her. He realized his plate was empty, that he couldn't recall a single thing he had eaten. Servitors quickly cleared away the remainder of the meal. When they had finished, Teague stood up. Brethren of the coast, he said formally, Don Raphael brought with him a man that I want you to meet. He is one of us, a man on the account, and he has personally witnessed the actions of these rogue pirates. I want you to hear what he has to say. The keeper of the code nodded, and the guard opened the door. A scar-faced man wearing a huge, battered hat strode in, and then halted beside Teague. Ladies, gentlemen, allow me to present to you Captain Hector Barbossa. Captain Barbossa stepped up to the table and stood before the assembled pirate lords. Teague indicated a chair, but he shook his grizzled head. Thank ye, Captain Teague, but I prefer to stand, he said in a gravelly voice. As he stood there, gazing down at each of the pirate lords in turn, Jack found himself covertly studying the man with some curiosity. Barbossa had an accent he couldn't quite place, and was usually good at that kind of thing. West Country? Cornwall, perhaps? Jack estimated he was in his early 40s. His weather-beaten features with the scraggly beard wouldn't have been handsome even if they'd been unmarred. His clothing was old and battered, stained with salt and other, less pleasant substances. But his baldric was well-oiled, and his weapons were clean. His eyes were sharp. They missed nothing. Gents, ladies, Barbossa said, inclining his head, 'tis lucky am I to be standing here afore you today. 2 months ago, almost to the day, me ship Cobra was attacked and sunk by one of our own. We had raised our true colors, and yet they still tried to slaughter us. We were attacked by one of our own brethren. A clear violation of the code 'twas. His accented speech was so effectively salty, Jack had half expected him to say "arr" at any moment. And yet, despite the accented rough speech, here was a man of some intelligence, perhaps even a man with some education. Teague nodded. Please tell us the entire story, Captain Barbossa. Aye, Captain Teague, Barbossa said. And hard telling it be, sir. Every time I think about me poor Polly, he hesitated. An expression of genuine sorrow flickered across his face. Jack was surprised to see it. Barbossa impressed him as a tough, no-holds-barred pirate, someone who would make a formidable opponent in a fight, a good swordsman, but not one to abide by prissy rules. Here was a man who would knock you down and kick your teeth in as easily as look at you, if you were unwise enough to cross him. Who is this Polly? Mistress Ching demanded. Your doxy? Barbossa looked rather shocked. Course not, ma'am. 'Tis bad luck to be bringing a woman aboard a ship. Polly weren't human. Polly, that is the English name of a parrot, Villanueva observed. I did have a parrot named Polly once, Barbossa admitted. A fine bird she was, but she messed up the shoulder of me jacket. Jack saw the hint of something that might have been sardonic humor flash across his features, and realized Barbossa was indulging in a bit of irony. The grizzled pirate sighed theatrically. But the Polly I lost after the battle was me little monkey. Pretty little thing she was. Understood every word I said to her. Teague cleared his throat, and a touch of impatience showed in his normally impassive features. Tell us about the battle, Captain Barbossa, he urged. Jack watched as Barbossa hesitated. He came here to tell his tale, he thought. Why doesn't he? For a moment he was puzzled, then understanding dawned. Here was a man who was so accustomed to being devious, that even when he wanted to tell the straightforward truth it was difficult for him to do. Barbossa thought for a moment, then straightened his shoulders, as though he were about to cross swords. Let me just tell it as it happened, gents and ladies. Me ship was a tidy little schooner named of Cobra. We were sailing in the waters north of Bermuda on our way back from an encounter we had with a French bark. Took a nice haul, we did. Ivory. We were riding low in the water, so laden we be. Then me topman spies a sail. We thought we'd take a look, so we changed course. And they must have spotted us too, because they did likewise. Jack leaned forward, listening intently. Lady Esmeralda touched his sleeve with her fingertips, then turned to her. She gave a slight shake of her head. He told this story to us on the voyage to Shipwreck Cove, she'd murmured for his hearing alone. It is most disturbing. Barbossa continued. When we spied that sail, it was already late in the afternoon, and it took us a few hours to approach each other. I told me men to run up a Frenchy ensign in honor of our rich cargo, and the stranger, he did the same, showed Dutch colors. Finally, not too long after sunset, we came within long gun range of each other. I be studying him through my spyglass and had me suspicions. The ship was a sloop, Bermuda rigged, common vessel, especially in these parts. I caught a few glimpses of the crew, and even at that distance it didn't seem as though they were wearing the right clothing for merchantmen. So I orders me crew to run up me black flag. The moment we raised our true colors, that sloop, he run up his flag too. A red flag with a black demon's skull on it. 'Twas then I knew for certain that he was another pirate. We all had a good laugh, me and me crew. We waved at 'em, they waved back. Then I gives the order to come about to put our rudder to 'em. The code calls for us all to respect our fellows on the account, and I was abiding by it. On the account was pirate slang for piracy. Jack saw the keeper of the code nod approvingly as Barbossa described his actions. What happened then? We'd no sooner put up our stern to 'em than the blackguards fired on us. I noticed a big, fancy, ornamented brass bow chaser on his vessel through me glass. Indian work it looked to be. Fired a big shot, 9-pounder maybe. The first one missed us, but the second one got us, and blew our rudder to flinders. Cobra began taking on water. I used me sails and threw out me anchor to turn her, and returned fire. Broadsided 'em good we did. Barbossa's words were weaving a spell in the room. Jack realized, glancing at the pirate lords. Each of them were listening with an expression that said, clearer than words, that the captain's account was bringing back memories of hard-fought engagements. Barbossa's voice grew a bit rougher, as if remembering this part was almost painful. They shot back, of course, and we battled till the air was so thick with smoke that you could scarce see your target save by the muzzle flashes from our gun ports. It was a fight, it was. Half me men were dead or dying when I realized the sun must have set. By that time I knew there was no hope for me poor Cobra. She was sinking fast. I knew darkness was our only chance to escape, so I gives the order to abandon ship. Half our boats had been reduced to kindling, but we still had a few that were seaworthy. Jack, envisioning the situation, swallowed hard as he reached for his wine goblet. He'd been on a foundering ship before, following a losing battle, and Barbossa's story brought the memories back. The smell of the blood mixed with the acrid taste of burned powder. The screams, moans, and curses of the wounded. The decks, slippery with blood and split entrails beneath one's boots. And the smoke, making your eyes water. The tears making clean trails down the blackened faces of the gunnery crew. Barbossa stood there, looking at the expressions of the faces of his listeners, and nodded. You all know what it was like. We launched the boats as best we could, but several of them tipped as they lowered, spilling some of us into the sea. The gunnery crew kept firing to hide our effort, and they leaped into the water just as Cobra began to go down. A dozen of them got sucked down with the ship. I was in the water, no boat within reach. Me poor Polly had been holding on to me shoulder. She was wearing her little blue dress, but suddenly she wasn't there and I couldn't see her. I swam under, groping through the water and the wreckage, trying to find her, but she was gone. When I came up to breathe, ready to dive again, even though I knew 'twas hopeless, two of me crew, witless one-eyed Rigetti and his grinning imp of a friend Pintel, grabbed me jacket and pulled me into their boat. Fools they be, but I'm grateful to 'em. Only the darkness saved us. for they sent out boats to kill those they found alive in the water. Hard to say which was worse, them or the sharks. We heard the devil crew laughing when men screamed as they were pulled under. Davy Jones' locker be too good for soulless wretches like that. Barbossa took a deep breath, then added, We stayed quiet, muffling our oars with our clothes as we rowed away. We rowed in shifts, silent the whole night. When dawn reached us, there was no sign of that cursed ship and her cursed crew of murdering blackguards. He drew a deep breath. There's little more to tell. We managed to reach an island, and by good fortune it wasn't barren. We built a signal fire. A week of thereabouts of tending it, and a ship, men on the account, dropped anchor and sent a boat to see who we were. They took us to Tortuga, and there we met Don Raphael, who told me the pirate lords currently present at Shipwreck Cove would want to hear me story, which is how I came to be standing before ye today. Barbossa fell silent, seemingly drained by the recitation. Borya, pirate lord of the Caspian, was the first to break the silence that filled the chamber. Monsters, not men, da? He said quietly. Then, so suddenly that Jack jumped, the little Russian slammed his dagger down to the scarred tabletop so it stood, point down, quivering, and added, Such evil deserves only death from us, Captain Teague. Jack glanced at the little man and saw a flash of something behind his spectacles. Pity? Anger? Some strong emotion it had been. And yet Borya's words, despite his violent nature, had been spoken in a level voice, completely dispassionately. Jack frowned, struck by the contrast between the gesture and those words, and how they had been voiced. The keeper of the code indicated a seat at the table. Please sit down, Captain Barbossa. We would like you to remain for our discussion. Teague nodded at the servitor. Some wine for the captain. Thank ye, Captain Teague, Barbossa said, seating himself. He took the wine goblet that was offered to him, and drained it in a few loud gulps. Thirsty work, he announced, settling it back down. You'd think it would be growed easier in the tellin', but it doesn't. The butcher is right. Code breakers deserve only death from us, Mistress Ching announced. Her sightless eyes shone eerily in the dimness. As the keeper has pointed out, the navies of the world do not discriminate between them and us, Villanueva said. Those rogues could take us all down with them. We should find them and deal with them, Don Raphael said. We know the seas better than any naval vessel. We do, da, Borya said. Coldonia stands ready to find rogue vessel and capture her. Jack surprised himself by speaking up. It seems to me that there must be more than one vessel. After listening to so many reports, there are just too many encounters or near encounters for one vessel to be causing them all. Teague gave him a glance, and it was clear the keeper was surprised to hear Jack say something relevant and sensible. He did not speak, however, only nodded. Aye, lad, Barbossa said. From what Don Raphael told me, you're making sense. Too many attacks within a short time period, too widely spaced. Can't be the work of a single devil ship. He gave Jack a measuring glance. And who be ye, lad? Jack Sparrow, Jack replied, with a cordial nod. It's always regrettable to hear about the loss of a good ship, Captain Barbossa. The man nodded back. Aye, 'tis. And when we find that scurvy blackguard responsible, he can apologize to me little Polly personally in Davy Jones' locker. As his gaze met Jack's, Hector Barbossa grinned, a brief, grim flash of stained teeth, and added, I'll volunteer to stand executioner, Captain Teague. There's nothing I like more than to make each of those devils a hemp cravat. Shootin's too good for the likes of scum like that. In a few more minutes the meeting broke up. Jack rose, as did Esmeralda, but Don Raphael remained sitting, as he and Teague continued to question Captain Barbossa. Esmeralda laid a hand on her grandfather's shoulder. I'm tired, grandfather. I'd like to return to my cabin, if you don't mind. Of course, mi corazon, Don Raphael said, patting her hand and smiling up at her. I'll summon one of my men to escort Lady Esmeralda back to Venganza, Teague said. Jack seized this golden opportunity, and ignoring the keeper's warning frown, stepped forward, bowing deeply to the pirate lord of the Caribbean. Don Raphael, I would like to be honored to accompany the Lady Esmeralda back to your vessel. Esmeralda gave Jack a sidewise glance, then smiled. Why, that would be very nice. Thank you, Jack. Jack bowed to her, then formally crooked his arm. Esmeralda placed her hand on it, still smiling at him with a warmth that made his head swim, far more than the wine he drunk. Thank ye, lad, Don Raphael said, giving him a smile and nod. Jack resolutely refused to look at Teague as he escorted Esmeralda out of the chamber. Okay, so Barbossa is here, and we get to learn some earlier history about him. The book also says that he is in his 40s, which would mean he would be in his mid-50s, maybe even 60, by the time of the Curse of the Black Pearl. That would mean then that he is around 80 by the time of Dead Men Tell No Tales, which I feel is definitely older than we would believe. You could argue that he didn't age during the Aztec Curse, but then he would still be around 70 by Dead Men Tell No Tales, which is still old, but as we know, time frames in Pirates of the Caribbean never really match up well. We also learn about Barbossa's previous ship, the Cobra, and his previous monkey named Polly. And there was also a mention of Pintel and Rigetti there too, which is great. But Jack shakes away his memories and focuses back on the present as he and Robbie are watching the Venganza sail closer. Jack figures she would be on top of them in half an hour, and Captain Bainbridge yells for Robbie to hoist their colors. The English Union Jack flag is raised, and then the East India Trading Company flag is raised after that. Venganza raises a British flag as well, which makes Bainbridge even more confident that they aren't pirates, but Jack, of course, knows better. Jack thinks back to the last time he had seen Esmeralda, which was 3 years ago, outside of an inn in Barbados. They had 2 hours together before Jack had to report back to his ship, and during that encounter, Esmeralda had told Jack that Don Rafael had died, and she had been named the new Pirate Lord of the Caribbean. Now that Venganza is close enough, Jack and Bainbridge are able to see they are indeed pirates, and they are getting ready for battle. Bainbridge immediately pulls out his flask and starts to drink, apologizing to Jack for telling him he was wrong. Bainbridge is obviously freaking out now as he is sweating, shaking, and his speech is even slurring a bit. So Jack tries to calm him down by telling Bainbridge to surrender to save the crew's lives and give up their cargo. Bainbridge definitely has never had an encounter with pirates, as he is still shaken up and incredibly nervous. He eventually tells Jack he is right, and asks Jack how he knew it was a pirate ship. Jack then makes up a story about how he was captured by pirates and heard about that particular ship while they were talking. This, of course, is a complete lie that Jack has made up to make himself seem more respectable. But they then see Venganza raise her true colors, which is a black flag with a skeleton holding both arms out. In one hand, the skeleton holds an hourglass, and in the other hand, it holds a cutlass. To top it off, the skeleton is also wearing a skirt, and Jack finally sees Esmeralda on deck of the Venganza. Jack has a brief moment of nostalgia, remembering his pirating days, but then we get a voice in his head that takes the tone of Teague. "You left that life for good reason, Jackie boy," a well-remembered voice whispered in his mind. "You can't go back, even if you wanted to, remember? You broke the code. If I ever catch up with you, you'll be soon facing Davy Jones, Jackie boy, and you know it." Jack's mouth tightened. "It's not like I want to go back," he reminded himself sourly. "Why the devil would I? I'm an honest merchant sailor now, a ruddy officer, thanks to 5 sodding years of hard work and keeping my nose clean." So Jack broke the code. How did that happen? Well, we will find that out later, so keep that in mind. Bainbridge then tells Jack to speak to the crew. So he calls all hands, and he sees 3rd Mate Edward Tomlin wearing a baldric and a cutlass ready to fight. Jack belays that order, telling them that they will not be fighting the pirates. He then reassures them that they are not rogue pirates, and they will all survive as long as they sit quietly and let the pirates take the cargo. He then tells everyone to lay their weapons on the deck, and he finally gets through the crew and has them all relax. Jack, Robbie, and Edward Tomlin then take all the discarded weapons and store them in the lazaretto below decks, and Jack makes sure to lock it just in case. He makes his way back over to Captain Bainbridge, who is wearing a sword and a pistol. Jack asks to take his weapons, telling him he can negotiate with the captain, and Bainbridge then notices that he referred to the captain as a female, and he cannot for the life of him even begin to imagine the idea of a woman captaining a ship. Moments later, Venganza pulls up alongside Fairwind, and Jack sees Esmeralda in standard pirate garb with a broad-brimmed hat with a large black and white plume. When Bainbridge sees the captain is indeed a woman, he loses it. Minor language coming up, just a warning. "Damnation! By all that's holy, Sparrow, the captain is a female!" Jack wheeled around to see the old man's eyes flash with righteous indignation. Bainbridge's hand rested on the hilt of his sword. Jack swallowed. "Captain, pass over those weapons. I'll take them and lock them up, but I'll have to do it fast, sir, or you'll lose them." He reached out. Bainbridge swatted his hand aside and dodged around him, moving it like a man half his age. "I'll not permit such an abomination aboard my ship," he snarled. "She's wearing trousers. Heaven and earth, I'll not abide it. No strumpet pirate will board my ship." Jack went after him, but the captain was moving fast, still ranting, but now he was shouting. "By heaven," he bellowed, "damn me for a coward if I permit some pirate slut, a mere woman, to plunder my ship." He had almost reached the closest ladder leading down to the weather deck. "Captain, no!" Jack said, finally catching up. Grabbing the older man's upper arm with both hands, he swung him around bodily. Bainbridge cursed him in terms that would have done a buccaneer proud. Jack was astonished by the old man's strength as they grappled. The pale blue eyes bulged, glaring wildly. Jack ducked and tried to protect his face as Bainbridge slammed fists and elbows into his head and body. The first mate quickly realized that he'd had to either fight back, which might have merited being hung for mutiny, or let go. Jack's only consolation was that at the last minute he managed to grab the firearm out of Bainbridge's pistol belt. The captain seemed not to notice it was gone. He continued his rush for the ladder, reached it, and started down. Jack stood for a minute with the pistol in his hand, breathing hard. For a wild second he thought about cocking and firing it, but the East India Trading Company would take a very dim view of that, and shooting a man in the very back was not Jack Sparrow's style. Instead, he shoved the pistol into his own belt and went tearing after the old man. In moments, it seemed Bainbridge was down the ladder, racing across the weather deck. As he ran, he drew his sword, holding it high in his pudgy hand, waving it threateningly. "You'll not board my ship, pirate strumpet!" he screamed. "For God and the King!" Doña Parada, who had just stepped over the gap between the ships and was standing poised on the brig's gunwale, straightened as she heard Bainbridge's battle cry. Seeing the old man coming for her, brandishing his sword, she drew her boarding cutlass. Jack, who was scrambling down the ladder, yelled, "No! Stop him!" But the crew, sitting obediently on the weather deck, were frozen with shock at the sight of their deranged captain. With part of his attention, he realized that Doña Parada, with an amused smile, had motioned for her own crew back, indicating that she intended to deal with this portly, panting threat herself. "Lady, no!" Jack yelled again. "Don't hurt him!" This time, Esmeralda heard him. Still standing poised on Fairwind's gunwale, her head turned as she scanned the weather deck, searching for the source of that familiar voice. Jack knew she couldn't see him because Fairwind's crew, recovering their ability to move, had risen en masse and parted before their captain's mad rush. They milled around, blocking Jack's passage. He had to shove his way through the crowd. Realizing that any moment the pirate crew would be able to see him, he spared an instant to yank his tricorn down so it shadowed his face. "Can't let anyone recognize me. Teague probably posted a bounty on my head." When he finally emerged from the crush of excited crewmen, he bounded towards Esmeralda, who was still poised on the gunwale railing. Waving his arms, he yelled, "Lady, over here!" He saw her head turn, her eyes widen as she recognized the way he moved. At the same moment, out of the corner of his eye, he saw Bainbridge reach her. The captain's blade flashed in the noontime sun as he aimed a violent slash at Esmeralda's legs. Jack's breath stopped. He needn't have worried. Doña Parada had been schooled in fencing by her grandfather, in addition to the finest swordmasters in Barcelona. She leapt nimbly into the air over the slash, and came down lightly on Fairwind's deck behind Bainbridge. The captain whipped around. "Shameless hussy! Trouser-wearing slattern! Get off my deck!" He came on again, and this time she parried his cut, then disengaged, dancing back. She glanced over her shoulder at Jack, her eyebrows raised inquiringly. Jack could read her question as clearly as if she'd spoken it. "Who is this ancient lunatic?" "Abomination!" howled the captain. "Leave my ship!" "Senor," she spoke for the first time, her voice low and musical. She wasn't even breathing hard. "I know not who you are, but you are sadly lacking in manners. That is no way to speak to a lady. Drop your sword, and you and your crew will live." Bainbridge came in again, slashing madly, and again she parried. She stopped retreating and began to circle, her footwork light and balanced, in contrast to the old man's lumbering steps. "Please, senor, stop this foolish tack. I do not wish to harm you." Bainbridge's only reply was an epithet so vile that Jack's eyebrows rose. "Senor!" Doña Parada said reprovingly. "Please, such language I must protest." She parried another hard but clumsy lunge. "You will upset my crew, hurt their tender ears." Bainbridge repeated the curse. She laughed. The slow, relentless circling continued. Jack edged around the perimeter of their path, keeping his head ducked so Venganza's crew couldn't see his face, considering his options. Should he knock the captain out with the butt of the pistol? Esmeralda was toying with Bainbridge for the moment, and he knew that she was speaking truthfully when she said she didn't want to hurt him. But if the old man managed to get in a lucky thrust or lunge, or if his name-calling annoyed her... While Jack hesitated, Bainbridge, panting like a dog, cursed his opponent again, slashing wildly at her head. Esmeralda ducked, but as she did so, the tip of the old man's sword caught the plume of her hat, cutting it in half. She sprang back, saw the puff of white feather fluttering in the breeze, and her expression darkened. "You pompous old fool," she spat in Spanish. "I paid 20 pesos for that feather. You stop this nonsense." And then she lunged. Her form was perfect. Her sword slid in past Bainbridge's guard as smoothly as a dolphin's leap, and the tip found the fleshy upper part of the old man's sword arm. She pinked him, lightly, then disengaged, leaping backward. Captain Bainbridge staggered back, then halted, staring aghast at his upper arm. After a few moments, a dark spot appeared, slowly spreading. Seeing his own blood, Bainbridge's eyes rolled up in his head. Like a mast toppling before the force of a gale, he swayed, then fell to lie motionless on the deck. "Dios mío!" Doña Parada exclaimed. "I barely touched him. What ails the old fool now?" Jack flung himself down beside the captain. "Captain Bainbridge!" he called. He looked down at the grizzled, weather-beaten countenance and saw pale blue eyes staring blindly. "Oh no," he muttered, quickly touching 2 fingers against the side of Bainbridge's wrinkled neck. Nothing stirred beneath him. Jack yanked open the captain's coat and pressed his ear against the left side of his chest, listening. The entire ship seemed to hold its breath. Beneath Jack's cheek, the old man's body was still. No heartbeat. Jack listened for a slow count of 60, then slowly, reluctantly, sat back on his heels. He looked up to see Tomlin and Robbie Green standing over him. "I'm sorry, mates," he said. "He's gone." So that is the end of Captain Nathaniel Bainbridge. Edward Tomlin rushes over and tries to help Bainbridge up, but the captain doesn't respond. With the wound from Esmeralda barely doing any damage to him, Jack believes the cause of death to be an apoplexy, which is the sudden rupture of an organ, and he orders Robbie and Tomlin to fetch a hammock so they can prepare Bainbridge's funeral. Once they run off, Jack makes his way over to Esmeralda, and since he is first mate of the Fairwind, this means Jack is now in command. But he asks her to not speak his name. So the two of them make their way onto the quarterdeck to discuss terms and also to see what they've both been up to. Now that they're alone, Jack drops his refined English speech and goes back to his normal piratey speech here with Esmeralda. They discuss the cargo the Fairwind is carrying, and they agree on Venganza taking part of the cargo, and also they will escort the Fairwind to Florida out of pirate-infested waters. Esmeralda also throws in one more thing, which is Jack joining her for dinner on Venganza. Jack agrees immediately, and later that night, he leaves Robbie in command as he rows over to Venganza. Esmeralda's first mate, Luis Montoya, helps him on board, and he leads Jack to the captain's cabin. And once they both sit down, dinner is served, and Jack cannot stop looking at or thinking about Esmeralda. After dinner, Esmeralda starts to dance and pulls Jack up to dance with her, and she tells him that he looks far too civilized. Alright, so Esmeralda says, "I want you to look like my Jack," she whispered. "I want my Jack here, not this civilized merchant officer." Moving forward, she put her hands up to his neck and untied his neckcloth, pulling it free and dropping it onto the table. Jack's breath caught in his throat as she walked behind him and tugged at his best blue coat with the brass buttons, sliding it off his shoulders, then down over his arms. She hung it over the back of the chair. "Worst of all," she murmured, "your feet. Sit down." So Esmeralda then begins to undress Jack, essentially. She ends up taking off his stockings, his neckcloth, his shirt, the ribbon that is tying Jack's hair back. She takes everything off, essentially, so Jack ends up looking more like the Jack she remembers from years ago. But after she does that, she says, "Now you look like my Jack once more," she said. "My Jack is a pirate, a beautiful pirate." Jack's laugh was a bit shaken. "No, darling, the beauty stands before me." She laughed too, but there was an undertone of tension in it. "Flatterer. What is it your Obey woman used to call you? The one you told me about? Ah, yes. Witty Jack." He shook his head ruefully. Why in the world was she talking about Teodalma? "Teodalma isn't mine, love," he corrected her. "She's her own woman, make no mistake. No man will ever possess her. She's..." He groped for words to express something indefinable he'd always sensed about the hoodoo sorceress. She's... Sometimes it seems like she wears her woman's body, the way you would wear a gown." He shivered. "She has power," he said. "Real power. She's no one I'd want to cross." "Is she pretty?" Esmeralda asked, and he sensed a touch of jealousy in her voice, which he found immensely gratifying. He shrugged. "She's attractive in certain ways, but not pretty the way you are. You are lovely." Why is she stalling like this, he wondered. His patience was eroding, but he sensed that she wasn't doing this to be coy, but for another, more personal reason. And somehow he knew that reason was important. He gazed at her in the soft light. She was indeed beautiful. Her eyes looked huge and dark, for she had outlined them somehow. There was a faint flush of color in her cheeks and on her lips. In the years since he'd last seen her, she'd learned to enhance her appearance, the way women of her class at court did. "Your eyes," he said. "I love your eyes. The The way you've enhanced them. What did you do?" She smiled. "A little trick I picked up in the East. It's called coal. They all outline their eyes there in that part of the world, both men and women. The sun is so hot and it helps protect against the glare off the water. It also helps prevent infections. You should try it, Jack. It would look wonderful on you. Let me show you." After rummaging in a drawer, she returned with a small pot and a fine-tipped brush. "Hold still. Don't blink," she commanded. After dipping the brush into the dark substance, Jack did as she bade, and felt the brush glide along his lower lids. "Now close your eyes," she said. This time the brush touched his upper lids, each in turn slipping smoothly along. Esmeralda stepped back and nodded. "It looks very good on you, Jack," she said, after giving him an appraising glance. Jack looked into the mirror she handed him and was inclined to agree. "Thanks, love," he said. "I like it. I'll have to remember this next time I'm in the East." "Oh, they sell it in Tortuga," she said. "You know Tortuga." "I do," he agreed. "Port Royal has its charms, but it can't hold a candle to Tortuga." Silence fell. Jack peered at her in the dimness and realized she was trembling. Her eyes were suspiciously bright. "What's wrong, love?" he asked gently. "I can see something's wrong. Tell me." Esmeralda hesitated for a long moment. I... She broke off, then shook her head. "Perhaps this evening was a mistake," she whispered. "It was such a long time ago, but..." Jack held his breath, wondering whether she'd just open her door and tell him to leave, rather than give him the truth. Finally, not looking up, she said softly, hesitantly, "Jack, that time we met in Barbados, I didn't know whether I ever wanted to speak with you again. The way you left that night, without saying a word to me, after we had been together." "But Esmeralda, I explained it wasn't by choice," Jack protested. "I was betrayed. I told you, just as you were, just as Don Rafael was. It's not like I planned what happened. I couldn't help it. It was go with them or be killed out of hand by those rogues." She nodded and half turned away. "I know. At least my head knows that. But my heart..." She swallowed. "My heart remembers how I felt the next day, and it makes me angry. I know it's not fair, but you asked why I..." She broke off and shook her head impatiently. "I shouldn't have said anything." Jack drew in a breath, as for the first time he thought about what it must have been like for her. "No, I asked because I wanted to know, love." Esmeralda looked down, twisting her hands together. "The next day my grandfather ordered Venganza make ready to sail, saying on the morrow he planned to go rogue hunting. I didn't know what to do. Finally, after I waited all day for you to appear, I dressed up in the cabin boy's clothes, and I went to the drunken lady. And that's when they told me you'd run off with those rogues. I felt like..." She made a small gesture of tossing something away. "Of course, you thought that's what I had been planning all along," Jack said. He took a deep breath. "Esmeralda," he said softly, stepping close to her and reaching for her hand. She tensed again, but let him take it. He kissed her knuckles gently. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen that way." He reached down for her other hand, and she yielded it to him. Jack began kissing her hands, short-nailed and strong-form work, but they were well-tendered and feminine. He could never have mistaken them for a man's hands. "After I left," he muttered between kisses, "I regretted I hadn't said more when we parted, believe me. I cursed myself for a fool. I thought about you constantly, wondering what you were doing, whether I'd ever see you again." Jack couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken so honestly to another person, but he knew if there was ever a time for the truth, this was it. "Say you forgive me, love." "I do," she whispered. "Oh, Jack, I didn't want to be angry with you, but tonight..." I couldn't stop remembering that day. She gave a short breath of a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "By the time I went to the drunken lady, it was a good thing you were gone, Jack. I took my sword and my pistol with me. You know I have a temper." He ran his hands up her arms, then across her shoulders, and stepped closer. "I know you do," he agreed. His arms tightened around her. So anyway, a little bit later, Jack and Esmeralda make their way over to the bed in the cabin, and they are both laying there, and Jack notices a tattoo that Esmeralda has. So let's find out what this is. So he sees it, and he asks what it is. He says, "I saw this," he said, brushing a finger across the circular mark, "and thought at first it was a bruise, but it's not." "No," she agreed. "It's a tattoo." "What is it?" he asked, looking more closely. It was the size of a doubloon, and it seemed to be outlined in black and filled in with red ink. Jack narrowed his eyes. It was some kind of grinning, stylized skull, surrounded by geometric lines. "I never saw anything like that before. Did you have it when the first time?" She smiled, teasing him. "What, you didn't notice? It was dark, love, remember?" "I do," she said. "It was good that time, but I like tonight better." Jack laughed softly. Danger did add a bit of thrill on that notable occasion, but I agree, tonight was is the best. He leaned over and kissed her shoulder, then lifted her hair and kissed her neck, just below her ear. She shivered with pleasure, and he was tempted to just keep kissing her and forget about the tattoo, but his curiosity was piqued. He pulled back and said, "So, the tattoo?" She took a deep breath and rolled over onto her right side, facing him. "I've never told anyone about it. The only people who knew I had it done are dead. My nurse and my grandfather." Jack realized this was something very private and wondered whether she would continue. He didn't speak, only waited. Finally, she said, "I had it done when I was 14. My nurse told me the story, and she had a drawing of this symbol on a scrap of ancient parchment. She was almost full-blooded Aztec. Her name was Azcalzochitlán." Jack stared at her in surprise. "You speak the Aztec language?" One shoulder moved slightly in a shrug. "Yes, she taught me. I wrote down the words so I can remember them, because I don't have anyone to practice speaking with." Jack studied her features in the lamplight. The dark eyes, swooping brows, high cheekbones. She seemed to have features that reflected her Castilian heritage. But her nose, it was high-bridged, and there was something exotic in the flare of the nostrils. "You have Aztec blood, too?" he asked after a moment. She nodded. "My mother was nearly pure blood, like my nurse. She and my father were killed when I was 5. I don't really remember them. My nurse saved me. She plucked me from my truckle bed and hid me from the raiders by crawling beneath my mother's bed and holding me with one hand over my mouth." "Raiders?" Jack asked. She bit her lower lip. "They told my grandfather it was a native uprising, but my nurse had seen them. She told them that it was some of the neighboring Dons with their men, dressed up as natives. My grandfather was good to the native population. He didn't enslave them, he allowed them to work in his fields for fair wages, and he let his son marry a native girl when they fell in love. The Dons were angry. My grandfather's holding was rich. They coveted it." Esmeralda rolled onto her back and clasped her hands behind her head. The new position caused such interesting changes in her anatomy that Jack almost forgot what she'd been saying. After a long moment, she added softly, "When the raid was over, he was left with almost nothing, save a ship, a few loyal servants, and me. That's why he became a pirate, and that's why he preyed on Spanish ships instead of sparing them. All his ships were named for his vengeance on the murdering nobles who took his kin from him. I was the only family he had left, a part Aztec child." "Do you have an Aztec name, too?" Jack asked. She smiled rather shyly. "Yes, I was named for my mother, Queoxoquitl. It means rainflower." Jack smiled. "That's beautiful." He touched her hip again. "This is some kind of sacred symbol?" She nodded. "It's an ancient design. The legends say it was imprinted on the blood money demanded by Cortez." Jack's eyes opened wide. "Are you talking about the lost treasure? The one they say is on an island of the dead somewhere?" She gazed at him, her eyes impenetrable. Jack could not read her expression, but he knew by her sudden stillness that she had said as much as she was going to say. Esmeralda had shared her most closely held secret with him, or part of it, anyway. The thought of treasure was enough to make Jack's pulse quicken, but he would respect her silence, at least, for now. Okay, so we learn a lot about Esmeralda and Jack's relationship there, along with potentially the reason why Jack has supposedly broken the code. More on that later. What is the most interesting part of this, besides me butchering Aztec names, is the fact that Esmeralda has Aztec blood in her, and she also has a tattoo of the Aztec gold. Even now, Jack knows the legend and the story of it being on Isla de Muerta, and maybe this is one of the reasons Jack sails to find it in the first place. So anyway, the two of them share even more time together in bed, and after that, Jack notices the sun is rising and he has to get back to the Fairwind for Bainbridge's service. They bid farewell for now, and Jack rows back to the Fairwind, and everyone then assembles for Bainbridge's service, and Jack is the one who is officiating. But he doesn't know much of anything since he's never gone to church. But thankfully, Robbie is a devout Christian who had gone to church every week before he was press-ganged onto a merchant ship at the age of 10. Robbie tells Jack to repeat what he says, and they say the traditional words before Jack adds a bit of his own flair to it. He struggles through it, and then asks Tomlin to give the prayer, which Tomlin easily recites. After the prayer is finished, they slide Bainbridge's body off the ship into the sea, and Jack is relieved that it is over. But now he is in command, and after sailing to Florida with Venganza's escort, he will have to sail up along the colonies before turning east and crossing the Atlantic to London. Once they reach London, they will drop off the remaining cargo, then pick up another load and sail down to Calabar on the western coast of Africa, which is the home port of the Fairwind. Once they dock in Calabar, Jack would then report to the manager of the East India Trading Company office there. Jack is a little nervous as he has never met this man, but that is still months away from the voyage he still has to make. But this is also when he ruminates the sounds of the words Captain Jack Sparrow in his head, and he smiles as he thinks about it. But then we go over from Jack Sparrow over to this book's other main player, and that is none other than Cutler Beckett. Not Lord, at least not yet, but we meet Beckett as he becomes the new director of West African Imports and Exports for the EITC. He is currently unpacking and assembling his home office here in Calabar, and it is very hot, and Beckett has the fan in this room running. But of course, in these days, it's not powered by electricity. It is powered by a young boy turning a crank in the corner of the room. It is so hot that Beckett has removed his coat and his waistcoat, and the slave in the corner looks at the water on Beckett's desk. Beckett doesn't pay any attention to the slave and is more occupied with getting his furniture into place. After sweating even more, Beckett takes off his neckcloth and his wig, and he opens a crate filled with his books and brings them into another room of the house, which is becoming his library. We also see his housekeeper, Mistress Goodright, who is supervising the rest of the staff as they unpack his book collection. Beckett tells her to take more care in dusting the books, and takes one of the books off the shelf as it should be in his office. He returns to his office with the book, resuming what he was doing previously. We learn that Beckett has been working for the EITC for almost a decade, starting when he was 18 years old. With this new position, he was in charge of overseeing the sales inventory of all the ships on the coast. Calabar is located on the lower part of the bulge of West Africa, which is referred to as the Bight of Benin on maps. This area is also becoming known as the Slave Coast in these days. And we also learn that Beckett is trying to establish himself to other powerful, wealthy men and trying to accumulate as much power as he possibly can. His end goal is getting a title, and he has dreamed of getting one since he was a child. The first reason he wanted one was to make his father approve of him, which Beckett never achieved. What we will come to find out is that Cutler has a very strenuous relationship with his brothers and his father, Jonathan Beckett Sr. They despised him because he was small and preferred to read, as opposed to engaging in usual manly pastimes of the day. Beckett thinks back to when he was 7 years old, when he had asked his father to join a group of other young wealthy children for Latin lessons. Beckett's father ended up agreeing and built a schoolhouse on their estate, even putting the schoolmaster on payroll. The schoolmaster's name was Angus McFarlane, who at this point is long dead, but Beckett had a great admiration of him. The book that Beckett took from the library was a gift from McFarlane, and according to Beckett, it was the best gift anyone had ever given him. This book is Beckett's most prized possession, and it is none other than a copy of My Life Among the Pirates by Captain Ward. Beckett then thinks back to those days, and we flash back to young Beckett in one of his lessons. So let's go back into the book here. We're also going to learn a bit more about Beckett's family here as well. Schoolmaster Angus McFarlane finished writing the following day's lesson on the chalkboard, and then turned back to his 3 restless, tilted students, who were groaning openly at all the pages of Virgil he assigned them to read. Only Cutler Beckett, not quite 8 years old and small for his age, didn't complain, but smiled. He'd been enjoying reading the Aeneid. "Very well, young masters," McFarlane said. "Class is dismissed for today. Do not forget to complete your reading assignment for tomorrow. Each of you will be required to read aloud and then translate a passage for the edification of your fellow students. Now, be off with you." His Scottish burr was faint, but still detectable. Cutler kept his head bent over his book as the sound of trampling feet and young laughter ensued. The door to the schoolyard slammed and silence fell. Even then he did not move. Angus McFarlane eyed him for a moment. "Are you all right, young Master Beckett?" "Yes, schoolmaster," Cutler said. "I would just like to finish reading this chapter you assigned, please." "Of course, laddie. It is a pleasure to have a student who loves his book." Cutler Beckett left his book open, resting his chin on his hands as if he were reading it, but he wasn't. He finished the chapter last night. Instead, he let his thoughts roam free, daydreaming about how someday he'd acquire a title. "If I could become Sir Cutler Beckett," he thought, "my father would be impressed. He'd be so pleased. He'd smile at me instead of always frowning." Since the time of Cutler Beckett's grandfather, the Beckett family had been merchants, buying and selling goods from around the world. Old Raleigh Beckett had begun his rise to wealth as a cabin boy on a trading vessel. By the time he died, he acquired a fleet of ships, and sired 3 strong sons to inherit and expand the business. Beckett's father, Jonathan Beckett, had in turn sired 3 sons of his own. His eldest son, Jonathan Jr., was his father's right-hand assistant. His second son, Bartholomew, served as director of shipping for the Beckett Trading Company. These days, the Beckett Company, while no threat to the EITC in wealth and power, was one of the top 5 shipping companies in England. The Beckett family was very wealthy. They owned a townhouse in London, a huge estate, Springhaven, in Somersetshire, their own private yacht, plus many tenant farms, mills, mines, and other properties scattered over the southern England and into nearby Wales. Ironically, the Becketts were far wealthier than most noble families. The one thing no Beckett ever managed to acquire, and it wasn't for lack of trying, was a title. "I'll do something notable," Cutler Beckett thought, gazing unseeingly at the Aeneid in his small schoolroom. "Perhaps I'll grow tall and become a soldier. I'll be an officer, a general, or maybe an admiral. Admiral Sir Cutler Beckett. If I could do that, my father would be proud of me. He'd make my brother stop saying he should have drowned me when I was born, the way you drown a runt pup." Cutler's elder brothers had been in their teens when he was born, a small, sickly baby that no one expected to survive. Young Cutler had surprised them all by living, and by being different. From his earliest years, he'd been fascinated by books and learning. Instead of struggling to master enough mathematics to handle accounting, and enough reading and writing to be able to write confidential business letters in a clear hand, as his other brothers had done, the youngest Beckett soon evidenced significant aptitude as a scholar. Only his sister Jane, 5 years his senior, shared his love of books and reading, though of course being female she hadn't been taught the other subjects that fascinated her little brother. History, geography, and studies of the classics written in their original Greek and Latin. Proper young ladies learned French and Italian, as well as embroidery, deportment, music, and drawing. Young Cutler only came out of his reverie when his stomach rumbled loudly. Surely enough time had passed. Glancing up at the front of the schoolroom, he saw that McFarlane was gone. He hadn't heard him leave. The boy began gathering up his school books and slate, moving slowly and deliberately. He wished he could eat his lunch here, at his desk, while he read the next few pages of the Aeneid. As the boy walked toward the door, he brightened, remembering that his father had agreed that he should begin private Greek lessons with Master McFarlane, and that they would be starting today in 2 hours. Cutler was eager to read about the adventures of Hector and Achilles in the original Greek. The boy paused in the doorway. His gaze moved left, then right, while he counted slowly to 50. The brick-fenced schoolyard was deserted. Over the top of the fence, he could see the older, mellowed brick of his mother's herb garden wall. All was quiet, serene, peaceful. It was late spring, and the warm sun after a typical wet and chilly southern English winter felt wonderful. Reassuredly, Cutler Beckett stopped through the doorway and went down 3 steps, hugging his books and slate against his thin chest. He wandered down the path, his mind's eye filled with images of waves of Greek warriors attacking the walls of Troy. He never saw them coming. The first indication that his fellow students had lain in wait for him came when a hard blow smashed into his back, and a voice screamed that hated nickname into his ear. "Cuttlefish! Cuttlefish! Where were you? Did you think you were too good to play with us? Come on, Cuttlefish, let's play!" Young Beckett fell forward onto the path, landing hard. He tried to get up, but another assailant, he thought it was Lord Wolfley's son, 10-year-old Richmond, was holding him down. All he could see was the boy's buckled shoes and stockings. He figured it had been the biggest of them, 12-year-old Jeremiah, son of Sir Thomas Graham, who had knocked him down. The third boy, also 10 years old, was the young Lord Marcus Pangbourne, he of the red hair, freckles, and foul mouth. Cutler could hear him, shouting curses and urging the others on. "Hit him again! He's a bloody cuttlefish! Damn you, you stinking, slimy cuttlefish!" A blow slammed into his left ear, making his head ring. Dazed, Cutler tries to curl up into a defensive ball, but they were all holding him now. A brutal hand grabbed his hair, yanked his head back, and a fist smashed against his cheek. "Teacher's pet! Make us all look bad!" Cutler knew he should fight back, should, at the very least, scream for help. Master McFarlane might still be within earshot. But something strange seemed to have happened to him. He couldn't make himself move or react. He couldn't even blink. It was as though he'd gone somewhere else, outside himself, somewhere unconnected with his own body, which was now lying bloody and motionless on the path. Somewhere inside young Beckett's mind he was screaming and terrified, but that part of him seemed distant and unreachable. Surprised and unnerved by his victim's lack of reaction, Lord Marcus hesitated, the foot that he'd raised to kick Cutler suspended in midair. "Stop that! What are you imps of Satan doing?" The hands that had been holding him down released him abruptly as Master Richmond and Master Jeremiah jumped up. Schoolmaster McFarlane raced around the side of the schoolhouse from the direction of the privy, a lunch pail dropping forgotten from his hand. His Scottish burr was at full force in his agitation. The boys scattered, racing away, as the tutor flung himself down beside Cutler. "What have they done to ye, lad?" he said, gently touching the boy's bleeding cheek. Cutler Beckett finally blinked, and the world came back into focus. He was back in his body, and he hurt. Tears started from his eyes, but he would not allow himself to sob. Instead, he slowly sat up, bruised and stiff, and allowed the tutor to tend to him, fussing over his injuries. Carefully, McFarlane helped the boy to rise, then escorted him into his little office, the only other room in the small schoolhouse building. There, he poured water from an ewer into a bowl and cleaned the blood from Cutler's face. After making sure the injuries weren't serious, he smeared an evil-smelling salve on the scrapes. Then, taking out a brush, he began whisking the dirt from the lad's clothes, though nothing could be done to salvage his torn knee stockings. All the while, he carried on a soothing monologue, assuring young Cutler that he'd soon be right as rain. So, Master McFarlane, as he's tending to Beckett, says that he's going to say something to Beckett's parents about the bullies, but Cutler tells him not to, as that will make him look even weaker in the eyes of his father. And he also says that his mother is sick. This news will only make her feel worse. So Master McFarlane relinquishes and will not tell them unless something else happens. But Master McFarlane has a gift for Beckett. He was going to save it for his birthday, but he gives it to him now. So let's find out what it is. "I have something here for you, lad. I was going to give it to you for your birthday, but I think you should have it now. I know you'll enjoy it. You have a good imagination, and this is a book that tells of great adventures. It has a lot of legends in it. Legends about treasure." Cutler found himself reaching for it eagerly, his aches and pains forgotten. Treasure? Aye, treasure. He placed the book in Cutler's hands, and the boy read the title. My Life Among the Pirates. He looked up. "Who is Captain J. Ward?" "Nobody knows, lad. Someone didn't want to be recognized as the author, so he used what is called a pen name. I read it myself, and there's no doubt that this J. Ward knows what he writes of, though. Pirates, bloodthirsty buccaneers, and brigands, a lot of 'em, but they make for fascinating reading." Cutler's fingers traced the leather cover with its inlay of gold. "Thank you, sir." Schoolmaster McFarlane held out his hand, his voice becoming more formal, losing the Scottish burr. "Now come along, lad. I'll walk you back to Springhaven and we'll find your governess." So in that reading, we learn more about Beckett's family and also a bit about Beckett's sister Jane, who was 5 years older than him. We'll learn more about her later, but what I wanted to focus on is what happened to Beckett when he was attacked by the other kids. I'll read it again and then we'll talk about it. But something strange seemed to have happened to him. He couldn't make himself move or react. He couldn't even blink. It was as though he'd gone somewhere else, outside himself, somewhere unconnected with his own body, which was now lying bloody and motionless on the path. Somewhere inside young Beckett's mind he was screaming and terrified, but that part of him seemed distant and unreachable. Alright, does anything seem familiar there? I think what this is trying to establish is a reason why Beckett stands there on the Endeavor when the Black Pearl and the Flying Dutchman are attacking it in At World's End. People are always like, well, why did he just stand there and do nothing? And this, of course, was established after the movie, but we can work this into his character. We'll see this happen to Beckett a few times in this book, but I love this connection to him in At World's End, and it explains why he stands there for so long, almost frozen when the Endeavor is being blown apart. But anyway, we go back to the present, and Beckett thinks about his sister Jane. Jane was the only member of his family that Beckett loved, and they had a great sibling relationship. After his mother's death, Beckett had promised Jane that she could join him at his next posting. Jane had also written to him in secret for years against their father's wishes, but we find out that the day he arrived in Calabar, Beckett found a stack of mail waiting for him. Some were written by Jane, but he saw one with a black border with unfamiliar handwriting. It had been written by his cousin Susan, and we find out that at some point during his travel from his previous station in Nippon at the port of Edo, which is in Japan, to Calabar, Jane had died from a fever. But Beckett shakes away the painful memories and remembers a legend that Captain Ward had written about that resides in Western Africa. This legend, of course, is the one about Zerzura, and in the book there are even illustrations of some Zerzuran jewelry that Ward had supposedly seen. Beckett wants some of these pieces to add to his collection of ancient artifacts that he has gathered over the years, but Beckett doesn't gather them himself. He has people gather them for him, which reminds Beckett that he needs to look for a new operative, since his last one, a man named Gates, was killed on the errand that Beckett asked him to perform back in Nippon. Finding a man like that is not an easy job, and it is something that Beckett must do soon. We then learn about Beckett's supervisor, who is the Director of African Affairs for the East India Trading Company. This man is named Viscount Lord Reginald Marmaduke Bracegirdle Penwallow, and he mainly travels from port to port checking in on EITC operations. We then flash back to when Beckett had met Penwallow when he arrived in Calabar, and as soon as he received word that Penwallow arrived, Beckett made his way down to the port to greet him. Lord Penwallow is a large, older man who is always well-dressed in English high society fashion. Beckett takes Penwallow to his estate, where they have dinner. And we're going to go back into the book here and see the exchange between Beckett and Penwallow. Following an excellent dinner and several glasses of wine, the gentlemen retired to the library to sip their port. Penwallow lit up a clay pipe and puffed away, closing his eyes with contentment. "Ah, good. I never smoke while aboard. Would set a terrible example for my staff. 'Tis good to be back on solid ground, if only for the pleasures of fresh food, good port, and good tobacco." Beckett, who did not smoke, regarded it as a nasty vice, smiled graciously and nodded. "Indeed, Lord Penwallow. And may I hope that you will see fit to grace us here with my humble home? I've had the best suite prepared." Thank you, I shall," Penwallow said. "You have done very well, Beckett, very well indeed, at outfitting your home. You have some lovely things. I try to keep my living arrangements civilized, my lord, no matter where the EITC sends me. Since I plan a lifetime of service, it is well to have the ability to make a home anywhere." Excellent, Beckett. It is good to hear you plan to stay with us. Your work has been exemplary to date. "My lord," Beckett hesitated for effect, and then cast his eyes down humbly. "I assure you it's the least I may do to repay the generosity you showed me all those years ago." "Tut, tut, my boy." Penwallow waved his hand dismissively. It was the one holding the pipe, and the smoke made a trail through the air. I'll have to make sure to have the whole library aired and cleaned, Beckett thought, making a mental note to speak to the housekeeper when Penwallow decamped. Stealing a quick glance at his superior, seeing that he was smiling benevolently, Beckett drew a deep breath, making sure it sounded just a bit ragged. "Sir, I would like to take the liberty of formally thanking you once again, this time in person, for your rescue of me 10 years ago. To put it bluntly, you saved my life, when my family refused to come to my rescue, in effect casting me off. If it were not for your order that resulted in me being freed, I shudder to think what would have happened to me. The EITC invested a goodly sum in me, a new and unproven employee, and it happened all by your order. I have always endeavored to make sure the company has been well repaid for its investment, my lord." Penwallow, who had just taken a sip of port, waved a beringed hand at his companion affably. "Pish and tosh, Beckett. You repaid the EITC in its actual outlay within a remarkably short period of time, and since then you have been responsible for numerous profitable ventures, too many to detail. Here's to you, Beckett," Lord Penwallow said, raising his port glass again and saluting his subordinate. Cutler Beckett cast his eyes down again, the very picture of a modest young man who was nearly overwhelmed at receiving the praise of his superior. "My lord, may I only continue to prove worthy of such sentiments." So after this, Beckett then talks to Penwallow for a lot more of the night, and we find out here that Beckett wants to get as much information about Penwallow as he can, because if we know Beckett, information is very useful to him. So he learns about his kids, he learns about his wife, he learns about every single detail he possibly can about Penwallow, so he can use it later for his advantage. But after Penwallow leaves Calabar, Beckett says to himself, soon I'll be able to go back to Somersetshire and drive to the gates of Springhaven. I'll knock on the door, and when the butler answers it, I'll instruct him to announce me to Father Jonathan and Bartholomew as Sir Cutler Beckett. The thought of his father and his brother's reaction when their titled relation walked into the room made his mouth curve upward. And after I see the envy in their eyes, and watch them try to figure out how to ingratiate themselves with me, then I'll have the pleasure of giving them the cut direct, the worst insult high society allows. I'll stare at them as though they crawled out of a cesspool, then I'll turn my back and walk away, climb back into my carriage and drive off, and I'll never see them again. Cutler Beckett smiled, and this time it was a genuine expression of pleasure, having nothing to do with his customary gracious, humble smile, the one he could summon so readily upon necessity. No, this smile was a real smile. It was not a pleasant expression. So a few more months pass, and Beckett finds a replacement for his last operative. But he hears that the Fairwind has docked in Calabar, and first mate Jack Sparrow and second mate Robbie Green are here to see him. So Beckett shows them in. And this is the moment where he first meets Jack. Jack and Robbie tell Beckett of Bainbridge's death and how they encountered a pirate vessel. Beckett already is working the information out of them and specifically wondering why the pirates did not take the full cargo. Jack explains why, and afterward, Beckett dismisses both of them. It is also evident that Beckett is impressed with Jack, but he continues and interviews Edward Tomlin and a few other crew members to make sure the story Jack told him is true. When he is reading the logbook from the Fairwind, he notices that a page was torn out, but there is a faint indentation on the next page. Beckett sees that Jack had written the words Captain Jack Sparrow over and over again on the missing page. So Beckett smiles and says, "Jack, Jack, Jack. I've caught you, Jack. I know what you want." But the next day, Beckett summons Jack back to his office, and this is a very important conversation. So let's go back into the book. Cutler Beckett smiled slightly. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Sparrow. Please, take a seat." He waved at a leather chair he had brought in from the library for this purpose, figuring that Sparrow couldn't dirty the leather that way he might the damask upholstery. Sparrow looked faintly surprised, but obediently sat down and waited expectantly. "I've been reviewing your logbook, Mr. Sparrow," Beckett said, and produced it, still wrapped in the protective cloth. He slid it across the inlaid desk, back toward the first mate. "And I have been interviewing members of your crew." "Yes, sir," Sparrow nodded. "I've come to the conclusion that the EITC owes you rather a debt, Mr. Sparrow," Beckett said. "You handled an uncomfortable, inherently dangerous situation with logic and personal charm, it seems, and thus saved the company a considerable sum of money." "Thank you, Mr. Beckett," Sparrow said, obviously pleased and more than a little relieved. Cutler Beckett leaned forward in his ebony chair. "Generally, when EITC employees save the company money, I award them a nice bonus, say £10. Sparrow's wariness subsided. His expression brightened visibly. "However," Beckett continued, "I suspect there are things you would much prefer to have rather than a monetary bonus if I judge your character correctly." Beckett paused and saw a spark leap in Sparrow's dark eyes. "So how would a promotion to captain suit you, as well as a vessel to command?" Sparrow's eyes widened, and then he smiled. The smile slowly widened to an ecstatic grin. "Thank you! That would suit me very well indeed, Mr. Beckett. Are you talking about the Fairwind?" "No, I'm thinking of something a little larger, with more cargo capacity," Beckett said. "The EITC has recently acquired a brand new square rigger named Marlin." Quickly from memory, Beckett summarized the ship's vital statistics, her tons, burden, length, and rig. "Does that sound like something you would enjoy commanding, Captain Sparrow?" Sparrow's grin widened as he heard his new title spoken aloud for the first time. He nodded. "It certainly does, Mr. Beckett. Where is she? When can I take her out?" "She's here in Calabar having refitting done. They should be done by the end of the week. Then we load up your cargo and you can set sail, Captain Sparrow." Beckett was indulging his new acquisition because it was so evident that hearing those words made Sparrow want to leap up and down like a child at Christmastide. But something wasn't right. Beckett watched as Sparrow's grin vanished and the tense wariness reappeared. "Refitting, Mr. Beckett? I thought you said she was a brand new ship." "She is, but her cargo area needs to be refitted to handle her projected cargo. The shipwrights tell me she'll be able to haul nearly 300. With a cargo that size, you'll sure to have at least 200 arrive in Barbados alive and ready for sail." Sparrow looked at him, clearly understanding now what Beckett meant. Then slowly he shook his head. "No." "No?" Beckett wasn't used to that word from subordinates. "I'm sorry, Mr. Beckett. I'm not your man. I'll haul any cargo you assign me, every powder, dangerous as that can be. But I won't transport slaves." Jack Sparrow's expression was carefully blank, and only the tightness of his jaw muscles betrayed any emotion. Still, Beckett sensed for the first time this man had depths he hadn't begun to glimpse. Beckett was stunned, and allowed his reaction to show. He sat back in his expensive chair, and his gray eyes locked with Sparrow's dark gaze for a long moment. "You surprise me, Mr. Sparrow," he said finally. "This is an extraordinary position for a man to take in these modern times. The slave trade isn't a pleasant business, granted, but it is extremely lucrative. It's very good business. One can't afford these days to be finicky." "I know how profitable it is, Mr. Beckett," Sparrow said, "but I'm not getting involved with it." "Can you tell me why, Mr. Sparrow?" Jack Sparrow shrugged, and his eyes grew distant, as if he were experiencing some vivid memory. His mouth tightened. "Mr. Beckett, did you know you can smell a slaver coming for miles if the wind is right on the open sea?" "Can you?" "Yes. The stench is enough to put a sailor off his burgoo for a whole day. So let's just say, Mr. Beckett, that I don't like the way they smell, and I'll leave it at that." "Very well," Beckett said. He watched, enormously intrigued, as Sparrow stood up and retrieved his logbook. Who was this man, and what was his story? He was so different from most sailors. There was something wild about him, something untamed. He watched as Sparrow walked across the room and paused by the doorway. Thank you, Mr. Beckett, for the offer. I'll just stay aboard the Fairwind, sir, as first mate, if that's agreeable to you. This man is actually going to turn me down, Beckett realized, and then he thought, I can't let him go. He has too much potential. He might make an excellent operative for me in foreign ports if I can gain his complicity. He's smart and observant. If he proves trustworthy, he might be very valuable to me. Just a moment, Beckett said, making a sudden decision. Come back, Sparrow. Perhaps we can make a different arrangement. Slowly, Sparrow turned and walked back into the room. He paused before Beckett's desk but didn't sit down with his employer waved at the leather chair. What do you mean, Mr. Beckett? I mean that for some reason I'm inclined to indulge you, Sparrow. Beckett shook his head. I have another ship. It's one I actually own. It's an older ship. The shipwrights have told me that converting her to haul slaves would be expensive and rather time-consuming, so I bought her for hauling other cargoes. Beckett looked up at Sparrow. She's called the Wicked Wench. Would you like to sail her for me, Captain Sparrow? Jack Sparrow smiled. Yes, I would, sir. I'd be pleased to do that. Very well, then, Captain. Why don't we have a glass of claret to seal the bargain? So Jack and Beckett share a glass, and they end up talking about the My Life Among the Pirates book by Captain Ward and how they both have read it. And Beckett gets intrigued by Jack even more so here throughout this conversation. And he also finds out that Jack has been to the Orient, which kind of surprises him. And Beckett, of course, says that he was stationed in Nippon for 3 years, so it's even more of a similarity between them. And Beckett is already growing a great respect for Jack in this first conversation. But after this conversation, Beckett bids Jack goodbye, and Jack heads out of the office. So that is the first real interaction, I think, between Jack and Beckett. And also with the Wicked Wench. So Beckett has promoted Jack to captain and given him a new ship, none other than the Wicked Wench. That name should be familiar to you, as this is the ship that will eventually become the Black Pearl. We also see how Jack turns Beckett down at first when Beckett wants him to transport slaves, which establishes that for later. But 3 months after the Wicked Wench leaves Calabar, Beckett hears a knock at the door, and it's his new operative, who is none other than Ian Mercer, who comes in with a Portuguese man who deals in stolen goods. Mercer instructs the man to lay the goods on the desk so Beckett can see if he wants to buy them or not. When Beckett sees them, he notices the similarities to the Zerzuran jewelry depicted in Captain Ward's book. The trader pulls out an armband, a pectoral, an amulet, a ring, and a set of earrings. Beckett asks Mercer to ask the man where he found them, and Mercer says that the man had the pectoral for a while, but he won it in a dice game from a slaver named Duke Renjon. The other items also apparently came from Duke Renjon as well, and apparently he had taken them off some slaves he had captured, and Beckett agrees to buy the jewelry only if the man tells him everything he knows about Duke Renjon. After Mercer and the Portuguese trader leave his office, Beckett knows where the jewelry came from. They came from Zerzura. So Beckett thinks to himself, Zerzura, by all that is holy, Captain Ward, you were telling the truth, bless you. It's real. It's all real. Zerzura, the shining city where the treasure lies at the heart of the labyrinth. Kerma, the lost island. It's real, by Jove. Finding Zerzura will bring me everything I've ever wanted. Power, wealth, I'll have it all. The heart, the source of the ancient power. The golden treasure. And don't forget the people. Black gold, they call slaves. All of Kerma lying there waiting to be discovered. And it will all be mine. And that is the end of Chapter 4 of The Price of Freedom. And as you can see by how long this episode is, there is no way I could cover this whole book in one episode. That would be at least like a 10-hour episode. But in the next episode, we'll be starting with another key character in this book, the Princess Amenirdis of Zerzura, and what happens to her. And I cannot wait to continue this book, as there are so many incredible things that happen that I am so excited to talk about. So I hope you join me next time for the next few chapters. We'll cover about 5 chapters or so in each episode, so if you're reading along, the next episode will hopefully cover chapters 5 to the end of chapter 9. So I will see you all next time. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram and Threads at Podcast of the Caribbean, and over on Twitter/X and Bluesky at PodcastPOTC. I post fun content and trivia, so make sure to check those platforms out. You can also buy merchandise for the podcast over on Dashery. Be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon, and always remember, dead men tell no tales.